Hello!
Hi!
And welcome to Hen Harrier Day 2021. It's Saturday the 7th of August, and as the typical precursor of the inglorious August the 12th, we are bringing you Hen Harrier Day. This year organised by Wild Justice. Ruth Tingay, Mark Avery and myself, and a host of other people who you're going to meet throughout the course of our morning, have rubbed ourselves together in a very polite way to produce what we hope will be an extra special insight to some of the problems which affect our uplands. Now, typically, Hen, just before we get started,
go on.
Hey, listen, I've got my sunshine shirt on.
Well, I know, but I think you're a bit optimistic considering the thunder that was around this morning. I've got my raincoat at the ready just over there to dive and grab if I need it.
We've had what can only be described as climate changed weather here overnight. The gazebo where our cameras are hiding under at the moment has collapsed.
Everything's all over the place.
Due to the torrent that came from the heavens last night. Anyway, I'm attempting to alleviate any ill omens of poor weather by wearing my sunshine shirt. But back to the mission. Typically, Hen Harrier Day has focused on hen harriers, of course, and used them as a totemic symbol for the rampant persecution that takes place in some parts of our uplands. But this year we're going to spread ourselves a little more broadly. We're going to look at those uplands more generally, not just about raptor persecution, but some of the other ills that affect that part of our landscape. And also, we're going to be looking forward to the future. I think it's really important that if we're asking for change, we offer some solutions as to the positive benefits that change might bring. And today, along with a wealth of experts from a great field of research and a number of NGOs and government statutory bodies, we will be talking to them about the potential that our uplands hold as a very much improved part of the UK. Rest assured, of course, we will be looking at raptor persecution. Very sadly, this problem hasn't abated since our last Hen Harrier Day. If anything, in many ways, it might have got worse, and we're going to bring you some shocking stories about what is going on there. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? We've got plenty of really exciting things coming up.
We've got loads of exciting things on the cards for you today. Now, of course, this is all centred around conservation, but when we come to telling stories of conservation, we like to broaden our methods a little bit and get in some different methods, different arts actually, to tell those stories for us. So I'm really pleased to say that we've got lots of different artists being featured on the show. Darren Woodhead, for example, one of my favourites, absolutely brilliant.
Darren Rees
Darren Rees as well, also absolutely fantastic. Especially a special thing.
Hold on.
Vic Reeves.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Hold on.
Oh no, don't do that.
That's a little something I picked up from a man who I have an enormous amount of respect for, the one and only Vic Reeves, Jim Wah, who has done a remarkable painting. And some of our paintings are going to be for sale, for auction.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And we've also got a few prints as well, which they've very kindly donated to us.
Yeah, so lots of things there available for you to get involved in and help contribute towards the conservation that we're going to be talking about today. But it's not just art. It's sing, it's song, sing. Oh, I can't.
You're not going to sing, are you?
Well, I'm not, no. Luckily, I mean, you know, it depends. If the sun starts shining properly, then I might start singing.
I'll tell you what, you leave the singing up. Leave it to an expert.
Very well. I will leave it to the expert that we've got coming up a little bit later on. So there's lots of great stuff coming up in the show today, but let's get things started. And in order to do that, we're going to go over to Mark Avery. Now, you'll know Mark, he's one of the directors of Wild Justice with Chris and Ruth Tingay as well. He is the most extraordinary conservationist. His knowledge is just absolutely unparalleled, and he's a very remarkable person. So let's head over to him to start off the show.
Welcome to our countdown. For this Hen Harrier Day, we're going to look at the uplands of Britain, which is where most of our hen harriers nest. Now, there are lots of things that go on in the uplands. There's farming and forestry and moorland management, some of it for grouse shooting. And we're mostly going to be looking at the moorlands because that's where hen harriers spend most of their time. Now, moorland management will affect not just hen harriers, but all the wildlife up there, and it will affect people as well. So if we can look at these issues and get the best solutions, then we'll provide a better future for all our wildlife and for people too. So that would be good, wouldn't it? Let's dive into issue number 10.
Hello everyone, it's Lucy Lapwing here, and today I've come to a quiet spot in the Pennines to meet someone who's an absolute bog fanatic. So let's go find him.
So this is a bit of good bogginess, is it?
It is.
Look at this.
My favourite
Yeah.
sphagnum. It's
Amazing.
affectionately known as drowned cat moss.
Oh.
And it's because when you pull it out of the water, it looks like sodden
Ah,
animal
look at
fur.
that. It does, doesn't it? Why are bogs so brilliant?
They're amazing. Store carbon. Best terrestrial carbon store on planet, number one.
Right.
Number two, they're host to such specialist species. So they
Yes.
can make their environments acidic. They can make their environments as acidic as like pickled onions.
Wow.
That
I
acidic.
love a pickled onion.
And super wet. And because they create these hostile environments, they're creating something super special.
Yeah.
And to survive in something super special and super different, you have to be specialist.
Yes.
And so these bogs are not only great for climate and carbon storage, but they're so good for loads and loads and loads of specialist species that you find nowhere else.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that these are a habitat that, they're facing quite a lot of issues, there's quite a lot of threats. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
Burning them and planting trees on them and draining them dries out that peat. And it stops them being wet. It takes away sort of the lifeblood of the bog and stops peat forming. And then the problem with that is when peat bogs dry out, they release the carbon that they've accumulated over centuries, over millennia.
Yeah.
And that is a huge problem because, of course, peat bogs are the most important terrestrial carbon store on the planet.
Yes.
They cover like 3% of the Earth's surface, but they contain more than double the amount of carbon that's contained within all of the world's forests combined. And we've got this huge emphasis on like reforesting the uplands, which is it can be great, but actually a really important thing is to look to restore our degraded peat bogs, both in the uplands and the lowlands.
Yeah.
So Josh, we've obviously heard that there's, quite a few issues with bogs and they're wonderful places, but what are some of the things people are doing to try and fix the problem, do you think?
Places like the border mires have had trees removed where there was plantation. And places, RSPB reserves like Dovestone, Geltsdale, have had ditches, drains, grips blocked, and hydrology restored. And
Real. So it's about making them wetter again, really.
yeah, making them wetter and recovering the habitat that should be here.
So there you have it, what a bogalicious day. Hopefully you've enjoyed seeing Josh enjoy plants as much as I have. It's been absolutely brilliant. And hopefully you've also got a new appreciation for bogs and the amazing habitats they are. From here on out, we really hope we can start to see bogs being restored across our uplands because they're such a key element of it. It'd be brilliant for us, it'd be brilliant for wildlife, and it'd be brilliant for the climate. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll head back over to you guys on Hen Harrier Day.
Thank you, Lucy, and also thanks to Josh Stiles. I like Josh very much. He's a very passionate young botanist who puts himself out there, takes a bit of criticism for standing up for botanical issues, and there aren't too many people doing that. A disproportionate amount of attention is put on our fauna rather than our flora, and Josh is doing everything he can to address the balance. You can follow him, of course, on social media, which I would urge you to do, and also help him with some of his campaigns. I was corresponding with him recently about a campaign that he's got running up on a beach in the northwest of the country where there's some diabolical action taking place, but Josh is politely and democratically trying to deal with the council to set things right. He's a top bloke.
Yeah, he's a really fantastic conservationist, and I have to say as well, I adored that film because it's got one of my favourite things in it. Sphagnum moss.
Oh, you and your sphagnum.
I love a bit of sphagnum moss, right? Because it's so powerful. It's such an incredible plant. So actually it's about 380 different species of these peat mosses, which was what sphagnum is. It's a type of peat moss. About 30 species in the UK. The most remarkable thing about this is that it can hold about 26 times its own weight in water. So when I squeeze it
You
like
love
this,
doing that, don't you?
I love squeezing moss.
You can't keep Megan out of a bog.
You can't. I love a bog. I really do. I
Can't
really
keep her
enjoy
out of
it.
a bog, and the minute she's in there, she's got to squeeze something.
Yeah, but in the UK, right, our peatlands are about 3% of our landmass, but hold up to 30% of the carbon stored in soils. There's a really disproportionate percentage there, and we've got to really work hard in protecting those vital habitats. The more we can do, the better.
Yeah, indeed. I'll tell you another thing about sphagnum.
Okay, go on.
It holds so much water that therefore it can absorb a lot of fluid.
Yeah.
And it was used as a wound dressing
It was in World War One.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to save cotton because they needed to use that for gunpowder. So what they did was they used sphagnum moss on the wounds instead.
And it soaked up people's blood.
Soaked up people's blood.
It was only discontinued because, do you know why it was discontinued?
Go on.
Because it wasn't white. And post-war we got this affectation that for things to be sterile and clean they needed to be white, and when sphagnum moss is dried it's like a sort of pale brown colour, isn't it really? So people were turned off by the colour, not its absorptive qualities.
It's interesting because it's so much better than cotton in terms of its absorption.
No, it is.
It's really good. It's an amazing habitat. All these specific species that live there, because obviously it's an acidic environment as well, meaning that often fish can't live in those bogs. So it makes way for all these types of darters and dragonflies and all these things to come in and take place and live there because there's no predators.
Do you know what else lives there?
Go on.
Tipulids.
Tipulids. Oh, I like
crane
that word.
flies, and the larvae of those crane flies are intrinsically important to support the growing young and the adults too of many upland species of birds, things like golden plover and dunlin and lapwing and redshank. And I know this because a few years ago I had the pleasure of going to the RSPB's Dovestone Reserve, where I met Kate Hanley, the reserve manager, very, very knowledgeable woman who's been doing some fantastic conservation work. And when I say fantastic, I mean fantastic with a big capital F, which is glowing neon and surrounded by filigree. Dovestone is an exemplar. And also she's taking some risk and trialling some new ideas. So I was very pleased to be able to go back and meet with Kate again to hear what she's doing about restoring those uplands once they have been damaged by some of the sorts of things that people do to damage our uplands in the name of driven grouse shooting. Anyway, here is Kate telling me a little bit more about how to improve those uplands. Kate, we're getting soggy bottoms, but up until fairly recently this area was very poorly degraded blanket bog.
So if you'd have come here 15 years ago or so, you would have been looking at extensive areas of bare peat, so lots of black vegetation communities missing entirely in places, and everywhere else really quite species poor and gappy.
Well, what have you been up to then? Because you've been very, very busy with what you might call low technology, but a lot of very hard work.
So we have been doing lots of different restoration techniques. One of those is revegetation, so restoring those vegetation communities on the bare peat. We've also been reintroducing sphagnum mosses, so they're an absolutely keystone plant. Over the last decade or so, our volunteers have planted round about 750,000 handfuls of sphagnum moss.
750,000 handfuls of this stuff?
That's right, 750,000 handfuls of sphagnum moss.
Down on their hands and knees in the rain and sleet and snow and hail?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and they've done an absolutely incredible job. Really important plant for the blanket bog. There are creatures up here that really need a high water table in order to survive. So crane flies, daddy long legses, they need a high and stable water table in the soil for their larvae to survive. They're really essential for all of our wading birds. They're a really essential food source.
Let's go and take another look at a different part of the site. I'm really keen to see what you've got going on. Birch coming up here, look.
Lovely.
Scrub has become one of those sort of controversial words in conservation, isn't it, really?
Yes.
Some people, like myself, we're up for scrub. We like scrub. A lot of other people are worried by scrub. They see it as an intermediate habitat, which is, you know, neither open nor closed. But in an environment like this, it can play a really important role.
Really important. Scrub is probably the most undervalued habitat in Britain, certainly, and probably the most biodiverse. And where you get biodiversity and good delivery of ecosystem services is where you have dynamism in the landscape. So we don't want a permanent closed canopy anywhere, and nor do we want permanently open habitats either. It's about that constant movement and that shifting mosaic of habitats across a landscape. That's where you get the biodiversity. So all we're wanting to do is reintroduce into the landscape a component that's been missing for a very long time in the English uplands.
Kate, it would be tempting to think a potentially Saxon defence against invading Danes, but it's not. It's reconstructing what is a serious problem on this degraded habitat.
These peat mass edges. So a lot of English peatlands, they sit on top of the hills like an absurd sort of toupee, and constantly getting lumps carving off the edge. You're getting water pouring out of the edge. So you can imagine that this is not a very stable peat mass. We're losing carbon all the time, and peat takes hundreds of years to form, and we're certainly not forming it faster than we're losing it. So what we're trying is pinning these edges together with willow. So green willow that we've harvested from a different site. So the theory is that the willow will root out all the way along the timber that's in the peat and tie it all together and stop it eroding. And we also hope in the long run that the growth of the willow will cause the peat to become a lot more humid and a lot more moist, and then we can start to establish sphagnum mosses back on it as well. But we've got to start innovating, because these are problems which nobody's addressed yet. We don't really know what to do about them, but they're significant problems from a carbon and a water point of view, and we've got to start trying things. So this is what we're trying.
It's been brilliant, Kate, today. I've really enjoyed coming and learning about some of the very simple, sometimes, but imaginative solutions that you've come up with to problems that are not just here, but all over our uplands due to the way that we've mismanaged and abused them. And it does go to show that we have a portfolio of means of addressing the damage and making things better at some stage in the future.
Yes.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that. I think that's a really important film, and some really key words there as well. Innovation and imagination, things that we can do to just reconnect with our uplands and make them a better environment, not just for wildlife, but for people too. And on that note, we're going to go straight over to our first live guest of the day. I'm really pleased to say that Mark Avery is going to be joining us live. So let's say hi. How are you doing, Mark?
Hello, Mark.
There he is. Can you hear us all right?
Excellent.
Hello. Nice to see you. So, I mean, talking about communities, because often that is one of the biggest kind of conversations when we're talking about management of these type of habitats. People are often concerned about the communities that are involved. So how do we support that environment? How do we support that wildlife and the people as well?
Conference of the Parties, it's called. It sounds very dull, but it's an international climate change conference happening in Glasgow this autumn, and so the UK is hosting it, and we ought to be showing the world what we can do in our own uplands. Our uplands cover 40% of the UK.
I think, Mark, it's quite tricky for us, isn't it? We often, shout and scream about the state of other parts of the world where we see widespread environmental damage taking place. We can talk about, the felling and burning of Amazonia. At the moment, we know that parts of the Siberian permafrost are on fire. And we tend to look over the fence and scowl, forgetting that the UK is one of the most nature depleted environments anywhere in the world, and we're not really looking after our own backyard. Surely at COP, as you've intimated this year, it's going to be pretty tough for our politicians to stand up and ask for global reform if they're not fixing things in their own backyard in our uplands. And that's not the case at the moment, is it? We've been promised, for instance, action on things like burning, which contribute to climate change, and that action hasn't been entirely, well, what should we say, meaningful and forthright, has it?
No, we need to do more, and we need to do more right across the UK. In Scotland, the Scottish government says it's going to licence Muirburn, so that will be good, but we haven't quite seen the details yet. In England, DEFRA have introduced some pretty feeble measures to limit burning on blanket bogs, those bogs that we've already heard about and we'll hear more about. We need to do a lot more. I mean, DEFRA have only really started to protect about 40% of the area. We need to protect a lot, otherwise we're not doing a proper job at home, and so how can we tell the rest of the world what they should be doing?
Yeah, well, there's something that we can all be doing, isn't there? Because we need obviously that political action to change the landscape, but everybody watching can do something right now to make a big impact.
Yes, please. So we are launching an e-action, which simply means that if you read a little letter that we've written, if you agree with it, I think you probably will agree with it, if you agree with it, then enter the details of your address so that it can be sent directly to your political representative, whether that's in the Senate in Wales, in the Assembly in Northern Ireland, in the Parliament in Scotland, or to Westminster. So we'd like everybody to sign the e-action, have a look at it, but basically we're asking politicians to do a better job in the uplands for people, for the climate, and for wildlife. We should all agree with that. And, you know, just do it. Do it. I mean, everything. It won't mean that everything changes tomorrow, because these things don't work that quickly. But this is putting on pressure. And every MP I know says, well, we pretend we don't look at these petitions that come round, but actually we do. And if quite a lot of our constituents say that they're worried about something, then we take notice. So it's up to you. This is a little thing you can do. It's a little bit towards, if we all join together, the pressure will be big. And it's a reminder to all politicians that they ought to do more.
I think it's important to remember that at this point in time, we do have the ability to raise our voices in this way and politely and democratically ask for change. There are many parts of the world where it's becoming increasingly difficult to raise your voice in opposition to any government policy. And to not do so seems a bit neglectful, to be quite honest with you. And I think you're right, Mark. I think that our politicians might say they don't look at them and they don't care, but they will be wanting to collect our votes in the next election. And if we've instructed them and made it quite forthrightly clear about what we do care about, that is one way of influencing future policy. So I think it's worth standing up and, you know, signing a petition. I did a little bit on Radio 4 this week about, you know, the value of petitions, you know, whether they actually achieve anything or not. And the one thing I think they definitely achieve is to give us each individually the power to make a small difference. So we'd like you to visit wildjustice.org.uk/act and send our e-action to your elected representative. Any parting shots, Mark?
No, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of this broadcast. I'm going to, but sign that e-action. Do it now, please. It's a small thing, but if we all join together, it becomes a big thing. Thanks very much.
Excellent stuff.
Very nicely put. Every single person makes a difference. Every single signature counts. It really goes a long way. So
okay, so look, you can watch this and you can do that at the same time, or maybe you can do it later this morning, depending on.
No,
I don't
same
know.
time, people multitask.
Yeah, they can multitask.
You know, you can just
if you're watching this on a laptop, then presumably you can do that on your phone.
Oh, you know, you could get all your get all your devices out. If you've got an iPad, you might have a phone.
Because you do that, don't you?
Oh, yeah, I've got loads of. You know.
No, what I mean is that you're constantly multitasking, because whatever you're doing, you're on Instagram at the same time.
I'm not always on Instagram.
I think you are.
But that's how I connect. You know, that's how I campaign.
I know, but like, so you're watching a movie, but you're on Instagram.
Yeah, no.
You listen to music, you're on Instagram.
I have a short attention.
Where's your phone? Are you on Instagram?
I'm not. I'm paying very much attention to what I'm doing. Thank you very much.
Okay, but we would like you to sign that wildjustice.org.uk/act. Okay. Aside from action, though, we also need to enjoy, don't we, and love our natural environment. And one group of people that allow us to do that through their incredible, I don't know, imagination, capability and skill are the artist beast.
Jamie Redway. I mean, her art is absolutely stunning. I mean, the details of this male hen harrier, the beautiful golden eye, the feet, I like the specs as well, giving it a bit of contrast. What a fantastic piece of art this is. It really is absolutely stunning, all of the details there. Now, Jamie is a self-made artist. How anyone, right, can learn to draw like this, I've got no idea.
Well, she's obviously got a very keen eye for observation, but also an enormous amount of skill. So she's using watercolours and Indian ink to produce her drawings here. I kind of like the splatter behind it as well. It's a sort of a very much a modern take. But the execution on the male hen harrier is...
the details on the underwing here, all around the head, it's absolutely stunning. I like how one foot is kind of up. It's honestly...
I think we've got a little clip of Jamie in action, actually, doing some of her work. Very talented young woman, as we said, has been doing some conservation work as well, keen conservationist, has been working for the BTO, is going to do some work for the Wildlife Trust. But here's a little time lapse of her producing this work. And Jamie's the first of a number of artists that we're going to profile this morning. And I'm really pleased to say that she, along with the others, has very, very kindly allowed us to use their artwork to produce a set of limited edition prints, which we are going to be selling to raise some money, and also, going a step further, these artists have been kind enough to donate their original work too.
Yeah.
So we're going to have an auction, details will be coming up a bit later on, where you could bid to have the original of Jamie's artwork.
No, I wouldn't mind that above like my bed or something. I'd like a
Beautiful.
massive Hen Harrier. I mean, amazing.
Beautiful,
Really
very,
beautiful.
very
Yeah.
talented, and a young woman as well.
Yes, exactly. We
in
like
her
that.
20s.
We like
Amazing.
that. We like that.
Amazing stuff. Excellent stuff. Okay, next up we've got another forthright campaigner, a man who's written a fabulous book. If you haven't read it yet, I suggest you gravitate towards it, Who Owns England? And it throws tremendous insight into some of the socio-economic and historical problems we have when it comes to implementing conservation in the UK. I'm talking about the one and only Guy Shrubsole. And Mark Avery is now going to introduce and have a little chat with Guy about some of the very far-reaching and underlying problems which are sometimes holding us back and sometimes thwarting our endeavours to, as I said, implement, good quality conservation far more rapidly than we would like. And here is Mark and Guy to tell us a little bit more.
Issue number 8 is land ownership. So I've got a garden and I can do much as I like in my own garden, and there are thousands of landowners over the uplands of Britain who they can make many of the choices about what type of management happens on their land. So we've got to get to those landowners to persuade them to do things in a helpful way, or maybe the state ought to own more land itself so that we could operate on a bigger scale. But somebody who really knows about this is Guy Shrubsole. He works for Rewilding Britain, but he also wrote a fantastic book on this subject called Who Owns England? Let's hear from Guy.
Thanks very much, Mark. Who owns land matters. It matters because a very small number of people, less than 1% of the population, own half of all the land in England. And landowners have huge sway over how land is used, for good or for ill. When it comes to grouse moors, an even smaller elite own them. Even The Spectator magazine says that to own a grouse moor is screamingly elitist. In England, there are around 150 grouse moor estates, covering an area the size of Greater London. Around half of these are owned by members of the aristocracy, and the other half by a mix of city bankers, Saudi princes, and businessmen and women. In Scotland, there are over 300 grouse moors, covering vast swathes of the Highlands and the Cairngorms. You can see a map that I've made of who owns grouse moors in England at the website grousemoors.whoownsengland.org. And do also check out the amazing work that's been done by Andy Whiteman at whoownsScotland.org.uk. Let me give you a few examples of who owns grouse moors. For example, the Duke of Westminster, who owns the huge 23,000-acre Abbeystead estate in Lancashire, and whose family can trace their lineage back to the Norman conquest. Or we've got the Sheikh of Dubai, who owns a huge grouse moor in Scotland and another one in the North Pennines. And then we have Her Majesty the Queen, who via her Duchy of Lancaster owns 2 grouse moors, one in the Forest of Bowland and the other in the North York Moors. And of course, she herself owns the grouse shooting estate at Balmoral in Scotland. So why does this matter? It matters because grouse moor owners have been lobbying government to dilute the legislation that would regulate their impact on the environment. An example of this happened earlier this year when the UK government introduced a moorland burning ban. But unfortunately, it was full of loopholes. And it was full of loopholes because the government had been listening to landowners who own grouse moors, some of whom are Conservative Party donors and members of the House of Lords, rather than to what the science says about how bad burning is for the environment. We need to put pressure on our government to create wilder uplands. And Rewilding Britain has a campaign at the moment calling on ministers to create wilder national parks. Part of that would mean that driven grouse shooting, intensively managed driven grouse moors, are phased out in parts of our national parks and that our moorland would be rewilded instead. So please do support Rewilding Britain's campaign. You can sign their petition on the Rewilding Britain website. Occasionally grouse moors come up for sale, and occasionally they're not just bought by very, very wealthy members of the aristocracy or city bankers. Occasionally they're bought by communities, and we need to support those efforts. There was an amazing project recently called the Langholm Moor Community Buyout, which bought a former grouse moor off the Duke of Buccleuch in Scotland and now has plans to rewild it. We need to support those sorts of efforts, chip into crowdfunders, and also support the extension of community right to buy legislation which currently exists in Scotland so that it also applies in England and Wales. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks
Excellent
very
stuff.
much, Guy. I mean, he always talks so eloquently and passionately about these kind of topics. And I mean, Rewilding Britain, what an amazing initiative that is, one which I'm sure many of us are really behind all the way. And that whole concept about rewilding and making our national parks better again, that campaign is so important. I mean, whenever I've gone to a national park recently...
Hold on, we live in a national
we
Look out
live
here.
in one, we
Look,
do, yeah.
What we're looking at,
Yeah,
an
a national park with a new
overgrazed,
forest.
in many parts, a completely overgrazed wasteland with no regeneration taking place. That you see these wildflowers behind us. It's not. I'm not blowing my own trumpet here because I stuck these in
You are a
earlier in
little
the
bit.
year.
You're gonna
I
do it.
wouldn't mind betting that there's more nectar available in my garden here than there is in the surrounding 5 kilometres of this national park, simply because there's a fence keeping most of the grazing animals out, the cattle, the ponies and the deer. There's no question at all that, you know, our national parks need some sort of reform.
Well, they're in really poor ecological condition. Lots of research has been done, and many of our national parks are in a really dire state. So it's really important that we're able to kind of help rewild it and get the species that should be there back there so they can become the gems of UK conservation once again. But lots of work to do. And there's, of course, a petition which you can go onto the Rewild Britain website. There'll be all the links in the comments below, so you'll be able to click on that, sign that petition as well.
Be good. And Guy's also involved in the wild card thing. You heard him mentioning there the royal family's ownership of certain grouse moors. So a group of conservationists has got together to write a very polite letter asking if the royal family would consider rewilding the areas that they own. What a fantastic initiative that would be. What a message that would send to the rest of the community. And we know, of course, that the royals are updating their thinking when it comes to conservation and issues like this. The younger royals are taking a more forthright stance, a more modernised stance on these sorts of things. So there is some hope that we might get some leeway there. And if they don't rewild all of them, if they just did some of them, that would be a fantastic gesture.
It's a step-by-step process, isn't it? It doesn't have to be perfect right away. This is one of the biggest things. People are often intimidated to make that change because it's not going to be 100% right. It doesn't matter. As long as it's 5% better than it was the day before, then that's still positive change. And every single percentage, even decimal of a percentage, counts. So let's get moving, get in the right direction and make our national parks.
The key word is transition, isn't
better.
it?
Transition.
It's not overnight change, it's gravitation, as you say, in that right direction, which was good. And you can find out again more about that wildcard letter and our methods of trying to encourage the royals to take some action. Not universally popular, that. Some people think that we didn't ought to push quite as hard as we do, that we ought to allow people to find their own feet and move in that direction themselves. You can make up your own mind on that. I'll tell you mine. We're running out of time. Frankly, we know this. We're being told constantly that the declines that we're seeing in our environment and elsewhere, the sorts of catastrophic losses of species that we're looking at, are so significant that time is running out. And therefore, I think that if we have the capacity to make effective change at this point, then we ought to do so as quickly as possible. And sometimes it's perhaps therefore pertinent that we encourage people to take those steps rather than wait for them to find their own feet when it might be too late. But there, make up your own mind on that. But to help you make up your own mind, I'm very pleased to say that we've got another guest joining us live now. Max Wisnowski works for the Revive Coalition, and if you haven't heard of the Revive Coalition, I urge you to go immediately to their website after Hen Harrier Day this morning and check out the things that they do. They are a forward-looking organisation based in Scotland looking at grouse moor reform. So what they want to do is see a future for that environment, a social, economic and environmental future for those uplands, which is more productive than that one that we've got at the moment. They've partnered with a number of other organisations, again forward-thinking groups, and have conducted some excellent studies, put together some excellent educational material. You can tell that I'm a great fan of Revive. So Max, are you there this morning? You're the campaigns manager. I think you're going to tell us a little bit more about Revive to start with, and then tell us us about Government's Den, which is one of your initiatives you've got running at the moment. Are you there, Max? Good morning.
I'm very much here, and I have to say it's looking very lovely where you are. It's torrential over here at the moment, but I'm very pleased to be connected with you today. It's brilliant, so I'm very much here.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us. I have to say, it might look nice, a little bit sunny, but the clouds are coming in fast and quick, so I think we might be in torrential rain imminently as well. But tell us a little bit about yourself and Revive then, Max.
Yeah, so Revive, a like-minded coalition of organisations working for grouse moor reform in Scotland. It's made up essentially by environmental organisations, by social justice organisations, and those concerned for animal welfare. Together, trying to provide a holistic approach for tackling grouse moors in Scotland. You mentioned some words shortly ago, transition, so essentially transitioning away from the most unsustainable elements of upland management towards more sustainable ways of managing our uplands. And, you know, the benefits would be there for all of us to see in Scotland, in that the huge swathes of Scotland which are managed, in our opinion, very badly right now, could be managed so much better for the benefit of our people, our wildlife, and the environment. And people are essential in this too, because the economics argument stands up on its own 2 feet in Scotland. We have huge swathes of Scotland, an area around about half the size of Wales, managed for grouse moors in Scotland, and the economic benefits are 0.02% of Scotland's overall economy. So if you put something like that into perspective, you can imagine Scotland's economy being the height of Ben Nevis. But if, in that case, grouse moor's contribution would be the size of a bottle of Iron Brew. So, and compare that to wildlife tourism, which is actually 5 times the size of grouse moor management economically already. That's a burgeoning industry. And that's shooting wildlife with cameras instead of with guns. So when you put it into perspective overall, you can really see a wider, more better picture opening up. And these are the kind of things, these kind of arguments we're trying to bring to the debate in Scotland right now.
Max, tell us a little bit about the partners, because typically when we think of coalitions of NGOs, we think they all come from the conservation sector. But one of your partners is Commonweal, isn't it? A social justice organisation.
That's right. In fact, I used to work for them before I joined Revive, so I know all about them, and they're a fantastic organisation which has actually produced the very first working Green New Deal plan, as far as I'm aware, in the world. Actually, you can find them in, on their website, Commonweal in Scotland, and they're a fantastic organisation that bring that social justice argument to the debate. So, for instance, the jobs figures and the alternative land uses. So, yeah, they've been vitally important in informing the debate overall in Scotland within the coalition. And of course, Friends of the Earth Friends of the Earth Scotland are bringing the environmental side of things, while League Against Cruel Sports and One Kind are very much the animal welfare side of things and bring that perspective. And Raptor Persecution UK, which is run by our very own Ruth Tingey, who's part of Wild Justice as well. So we are interconnected with the conservation side of things very much, but as I said, a very holistic approach is what we're going for in order to transition for the benefit of all of us, really.
It's these kind of coalitions though, isn't it? These collaborations that really make conservation work. It really is a fantastic thing. It's why I love Revive so much. But last year you made a video called Government's Den, didn't you? Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, it came about from a discussion we had at one of the Revive Coalition meetings, in which if you were to pitch it to the Scottish Government today, whether they'd like to start grouse moors based on all the things that we do, the wildlife killings, the killing of thousands of animals so that more animals could be shot for sport, the burning of huge swathes of our land for very little economic return compared to alternatives. If you were to pitch that case today, what would the government say? So dramatise and run a bit of a simulation scenario there, in which a couple of grouse moor lobbyists in a Dragon's Den style dramatisation face up to Scottish Government ministers, and I guess you'll just have to watch it to see what they'd say. And you can find it on Revive's YouTube channel, Revive Coalition, or on our Twitter. It's pinned at the top right now, so you can see it on our Twitter channel at Revive Coalition, so you can see it there too.
Max, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Very kind of you to do that. I would urge everyone to visit the Revive site and look at not just Government's Den, but everything else that you've been doing there. Highly imaginative, brilliant means of communication. As you say, some fantastic partners there coming with interest from across the spectrum. Revive is an organisation that needs enormous respect. I have to say I'm a massive fan. Max, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
We're going to move on now, though, to issue number 7, which is a very contentious one and a very pertinent one at the moment. We've seen recently that parts of the United States and Canada have been on fire. We've seen Cyprus burning. Tragically, we're now seeing Greece on fire too, and as I mentioned earlier, parts of the Siberian permafrost are burning. Now, some of these fires are very much a result of climate. There's no doubt about that. The scientists have been, again, quite forthright in their assertion. And they've been set accidentally, or by natural causes, we can say, through lightning and so on and so forth. And it proves a real problem, particularly after periods of drought. But in the UK, it's rather staggering to think that in our uplands, the fires are not started accidentally by lightning, or at least only as a rarity. Many of them, certainly on driven grouse moors, are started deliberately. And there are grave concerns about the damage that this is doing in terms of their ability to retain carbon. So here is Mark again, Mark Avery, the one and only, and he's going to be having a chat with Richard Lindsay about this incredibly contentious and very serious issue.
Issue number 7 is fire. Vegetation burning is one of the management practices in the upland, particularly in grouse moors, where the heather is burned in order to produce younger heather that's really yummy for red grouse to eat. But does burning the vegetation on a peatland really make sense when peatlands are massive carbon stores and we need that carbon to stay in the soil? Well, someone who can tell us about those issues is Richard Lindsay, who is a world expert on peatlands and bogs, and he works with the IUCN UK Peatlands programme, so he really knows what he's talking about.
Thanks, Mark. So, burning, specifically burning on blanket bog. Blanket bogs are peatland systems. Peatlands are wetlands. That's important because the only reason we have peat accumulating is that the dead organic matter, the plant matter that creates peat, fails to decompose because it's waterlogged. If we dry the peat out by draining or burning, then it will simply oxidize into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So what I'm holding in my hand here is sphagnum bog moss. It's the engine of our peatlands. Here on the living surface, the sphagnum is growing up each year and it's competing with this heather. So the heather never has a chance to get away. It never grows tall and leggy. It stays young and fresh, which are really good for grouse. This is what grouse eat. Grouse aren't interested in tall, leggy heather. And of course, the wetness of this sphagnum is also really important for insects. And for the early weeks of a grouse chick's life, it only eats insects, it doesn't eat heather. So this wet sphagnum carpet is really important for that early stage in the grouse chick's life. But of course, grouse aren't the only things that live on peat bogs. Golden plover, dunlin, hen harrier, they all depend on this living sphagnum carpet. But when we burn a peatland, we destroy this sphagnum carpet. And when we destroy the carpet, we end up with, in effect, a dry heath. And so the sort of thing that I'm standing in now is the sort of thing you will see in many blanket bog systems across the UK. This is not how they should look. They should be rich in wet sphagnum carpets. And so the government policy is that we will be restoring these dry, damaged peatlands to a living, healthy, vigorous peatland, rich in sphagnum and rich in all the wildlife that's associated with them. We cannot do that as long as we keep on burning. So it's really important that we stop burning these superb carbon and wildlife stores.
Burning of our uplands is a really serious issue, as we've just heard there. It's something that we all need to address, and it's part of the portfolio of things that we're asking you to communicate to your elected representative with. And you can do that by joining in with our e-action this morning. wildjustice.org.uk/act. If you go to that, you can send a very polite but we think well drafted letter to your elected representative outlining a number of issues which afflict our uplands, and one of those is the burning that you've just heard about it. Megs, I don't know about what you think. You're younger than me. You're
Yeah.
26 years old, okay?
I am.
Now, we've known for some considerable time, and it's been quantified and qualified by scientific research undertaken by independent institutions like some of the UK's universities, that the burning of our uplands is undeniably contributing to climate change,
Yeah.
and yet we're still doing it.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Because we're talking about a lot of facts here, but how does that actually make you feel?
I mean, there's no words for it, is it? I mean, it's just blatant disregard for like science, modern science, and blatant disregard for the future lives of young people and the climate. I mean, we should be evolving our practices the more that we understand new knowledge. We shouldn't be kind of using this word tradition, and I love traditions, don't get me wrong, but traditions have to evolve over time. Burning our moorlands, driven grouse shooting was something that was so ingrained in a certain point in time. Now that tradition needs to evolve, it needs to move forward with the climate in mind, with the environment in mind, and more importantly with wildlife in mind as well, and communities too. I get really frustrated thinking that we know all this information, and yet our politicians sit back and let this happen. And the people doing it are doing it still when they know. They should know. They should be reading around their subject, understanding it, because they're passionate about what they do.
Do you think they do read around their subject and they do understand
I think they read bias.
Or do you think that they're intrinsically
You know?
just so selfish that they just want to carry on with a scant disregard for your generation and all of those that are coming in the future? I mean, that's the question, isn't it, really? Are they ignorant or are they actively destructive?
I think it's a bit of both. I don't think people like to ever admit when they're wrong, and I feel like when you're telling someone that they're wrong, they immediately get their back up, and I feel like that's the situation that we've got into now, where the majority of people know that it's wrong, yet they're too their pride is getting in the way from holding their hands up and saying actually we were wrong, or perhaps they are just totally, you know, in a different kind of realm where they think that this is okay.
Okay, one last question before we move on.
Go on.
Okay, so that's the situation with the people out there actually setting fire to our uplands and burning them with all of the ills that come, you know, with it, as Richard's just outlined to us. What about the people who we've elected to regulate these sorts of things and act in our interest? And that does come down to our politicians. You know, they're sleeping on the job, aren't they?
Oh, they're not doing anything. You know, I just have no words for the state of politics at the moment. There is no regard for our environment. We've got COP26 coming up. I mean, what mess is that going to be? I mean, recently we had that conference, didn't we, down in Cornwall, where all the politicians flew in to Cornwall, flew in from London. I mean, this is just, it's not okay, and we can't let it continue, and things I think are beginning to change, but they're not happening at the rate that they should do. So we've got a lot more work to do. Got to keep highlighting it, keep moaning on about it until,
moaning, but doing things.
Yes,
like
exactly.
Again, it's that e-action that we're asking, and I am going to repeat it again, because I think that this isn't just about ourselves and our desire to enjoy those uplands at this point in time. We do, if we've got any sense of, you know, ethics, morality and integrity, want a future for that environment, for the people and wildlife that should be able to live there. So let's send that message loudly and clearly to our elected representatives across the UK, and you can do that by going to wildjustice.org.uk/act. Let's send that e-action. Let's send tens, if not hundreds of thousands of those to get these people thinking, and ultimately, we hope, get them acting too.
Yeah. There'll be a link right in the comments.
Let's move
there.
on.
Link right in the
We went a bit ranty there.
We went a bit ranty. We do that occasionally.
Oh no! Look, do you know what? The thing is, look at that.
The burnt Mars bar.
Mars bars, they do burn, you know.
They do. I'm getting quite a smell from it.
Anyway,
quite sweet.
moving on.
Anyway, moving on. Now, all of those information should be in the comments. You can click on all of the links, but also there's opportunities for you to send in questions to us. So one question has come through so far.
Yeah.
Is sphagnum moss good in hanging baskets?
I'd rather see it on the bogs.
I'd rather see it on the bog. Apparently it is an absorbent at the bottom of your hanging basket. Apparently it does help hold water for plants. I don't have a green finger. I don't have a green finger.
Find alternative materials. Let's leave the sphagnum where the sphagnum needs to be, which is in the bog.
Exactly.
Feeding the tipulids, feeding the dunlin, and feeding that really productive environment, which we hope will be getting better and better.
There's better materials to be using in your hanging basket than sphagnum moss.
Coir. Don't people put coir matting? I don't know. I'm not a hanging basket sort of bloke, really.
I'm more of like, I get some seeds, throw them around.
If I had a hanging basket, there's a few people I might hang in it, but not plants. But we better move on from that.
Move on. Now, of course, when we talk about driven grouse shooting, one of the things that we're talking about, of course, is the wildlife and the environment, but the communities and the people are at the heart of absolutely everything. So how do people living around driven grouse moors feel about that type of industry right on their doorstep? Well, I believe you went and you had a chat with Bob Bosins, didn't you? Bob Berzins.
Bob Berzins.
Bob Berzins.
He's a fantastic bloke. Yeah, I met him actually on a driven grouse moor, and he talked to me about what it was like living alongside that and some of the problems that he faces when he asks simple questions about its management policies. Here is Bob and I out on the moor.
In issue number 6, we're going to think about people who live in the uplands. Now, sometimes you're given the impression that everybody gets on fine in the uplands, there are no tensions, and everybody thinks the same. Well, it's not quite true. I've had 1 or 2, let's say, tense conversations with gamekeepers in my time. So let's hear from Bob Berzins, who knows the Peat District very well. He's an environmentalist, he's an author, and he's a fell runner. He's a talented guy. So let's hear about his experiences.
Bob, you live close to a grouse moor. What's that like?
Well, I live just down the road in Sheffield there. About a quarter of the area of Sheffield is moorland. Moorland is really important for the city. And I think what I appreciate is very much that we need these wide open spaces. We need to connect with nature up here, but unfortunately what we find when we come up here is that it's not a natural environment. It's very much one that's been heavily managed for one product, and that's red grouse.
What sort of impact does the management have on the communities that are alongside it?
Well, we're walking past lots of areas that have been burnt here. When the burning of the vegetation takes place, what we see is lots of particulates being emitted into the atmosphere. It's very bad for our health to breathe in that polluted air. Lots of burning takes place on the steep slopes here. The water will flow very quickly off those slopes. Flooding is a big concern.
It's also become incredibly divisive. Emotions run high when it comes now to driven grouse shooting, and there are a number of reasons. You mentioned the burning and the flooding, but the criminal persecution of birds of prey is high up there as well. How does that impact on you and your life?
Well, just it's the whole of the intensity of the grouse shooting industry and how seriously they take it. And how sort of protective they are about it. I mean, one of the big problems that I've faced recently is online abuse and malicious allegations and intimidation up on the moors here, damage to my vehicle, and that's all because I'm one of the people who speaks out about what happens around here. These moorlands that we're on at the moment, they are huge areas of land, and they're owned by some very rich and influential people, and they have the say in how all the laws are implemented up here and how everybody acts, and they have a say in how all the statutory government agencies sort of respond to things like reports of Raptor persecution.
What can we do then to support communities like yours, Bob, that are confronted with the day-to-day ills of this industry?
Well, I think it's a matter of really publicising what's going on, helping people to understand the value of these places, how important it is for their physical and mental well-being to come out here, and how important it is really to connect with nature.
Okay. Well, you're raising your voice. Hopefully we can all amplify that and our own and see some positive change, because it would be nice to think that we might come back up here in a few years' time and see some trees, Bob, you know, just a tree and maybe a bird sat in it, and not know that somewhere out there tucked in the heather is some ghastly snare or trap ridding this place of any predator which should be playing a role in its ecology.
Yeah, well, that's what we need to see, greater biodiversity, certainly in the vegetation, but very much so in the wildlife as well.
Okay, thank you. Shocking, isn't it, the amount of abuse these people get for simply pointing out that other people are essentially breaking the law.
I know. It's just, it should be a given, shouldn't it? People should be able to use their voice and not feel personally threatened by the people in the industry that are literally just outside their front doors. You know, what a way to live that is. It's just, you know...
Sometimes some of the individuals involved in these industries are not the most forgiving people, I've got to say. You only have to follow me on social media. I'm just looking at my social media feed now. So we're in the middle of doing Hen Harrier Day, of course, which seems to be a ripe opportunity for trolls to print anonymously, of course, some pretty hideous things. I was going to read some of them out, which have come through in the last couple of hours. You know, but do you know what, I'm not going to. I don't want to give these people any more particular oxygen, but suffice to say that they're here, and it's a constant thing. They're constantly spreading misinformation, they're telling lies, perpetuating those lies, and trying to disseminate them as rapidly and as broadly as possible. It is a fact of our modern age, though. You can't let it get to you, but it's quite tough, and sometimes they do tend to cut through. And I think the other thing we have to recognise is that sometimes this is isolated individuals hiding behind anonymity in their living rooms, but on other occasions it's orchestrated campaigns, and it's come from quite high profile campaigning organisations as well.
Very high profile.
Tingay, one of the directors of Wild Justice, is a person who gets an enormous amount of abuse as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally unjustified.
Honestly, absolutely horrific. And last year, well, so every year really, she's, you know, at the forefront of this abuse. Last year there were particular comments that were made that were actually led to an apology letter, which I'm going to read out. This is an apology from Duncan Thomas. Now, Duncan is the Basque Northern director, and after some pretty horrific comments he made to her, she obviously complained about this and did receive a letter of apology. So I'm just going to read this out for you now. Dear Ruth, I am aware that you have raised an issue / complained regarding a comment I made on a social media post. I write to make a direct personal apology for the comment. I'm sorry for any distress which this comment may have caused you. We have significantly different views on matters which we are both passionate about, and this is undoubtedly creating tensions. But that is not an excuse for the comment, and it was not acceptable. Yours sincerely, Duncan Thomas.
Well, let's say thank you to Duncan before we go any further, you know, for standing up and recognising that on this occasion you'd made a mistake. I think I've also got to accept that whilst Ruth was the victim of that abuse, there are plenty of people on, I hate to use the term, but I have to on this instance, our side, that do abusing too. And that can't be justified. That can't be justified either. I hate the thought that anyone who is trying to influence change here in a positive way and sympathises with the views of those of us watching Hen Harrier Day would be abusing people like Duncan, for instance. It's not acceptable. We don't want this to be divisive. We would much rather sit down, wouldn't we, in constructive, creative conversation, rather than polarising everything and throwing insults at one another. So can I issue, on behalf of someone who's constantly trolled, and on behalf of Ruth too, who gets a similar level of abuse, a simple plea: please stop trolling us, and if you are, you know, one of our followers, please never ever ever do that to anyone whose views you might disagree with. Find a very polite way of explaining your differences, and if you've made a mistake, then man up as Duncan has and make an apology. So thank you, Duncan, and please, everyone, let's try and cut this out. Let's try and have a far more constructive dialogue going forward.
we're not going to get anywhere if we're just kind of at one another's throat. It doesn't matter. There's not two sides to this. Everybody wants a healthy environment. You know, we might have conflicting ideas about how to get there, but it starts at having conversations, and we need those conversations to be open and people to feel comfortable entering those spaces where they can have those conversations in safety with confidence in one another.
Okay, from heavy stuff to something which is much more joyous. A few years ago I had the enormous pleasure of meeting a man called Martin Simpson. Martin Simpson is I was going to say he's a folk musician. He's actually not a folk musician, he's a folk legend. He's also a truly fantastic bloke. He's a lovely man, and when we reached out to him and asked him would he write a song about hen harriers to us, he said yes. Now I wasn't surprised, because if you've listened to his latest album, as we call them, I still what do you call them now? I call them an album.
Yeah, albums.
Album,
yeah,
okay.
albums,
it's just that they don't come as an album anymore,
no,
do
they
they?
come up on Spotify.
Vinyl. But if you do download that album, it's a very beautiful song on there about swifts and swallows, which is fabulous. So Martin has a keen connection to the natural world, a very keen connection, a very close relationship with that, and he writes about this and integrates it into many of his songs. They're beautiful songs, but a fantastic one about a gentleman who recovered a tank down in Devon and brought it back, restored it as a symbol really of one of the forgotten incidents of the Second World War. Anyway, I've digressed. I'm just trying to tell you, Martin Simpson's a fantastic bloke. He really is, and he's written a song for us now which we're going to hear for the first time about hen harriers. So here is the one and only Martin Simpson.
Bedstraw constellations shine among the blooming heather and ling, and the jade green berry bushes, oak eggers are on the wing. The stone chat and the pipits fly in spring lapwings and curlews cry, but there is something missing, there are no dancers in the sky. And the bird completes the skyline, that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? The pale ash grey sky dancer, or this selfish tyranny? At 15 I saw the falcon fly at Simmons' yacht on the River Wye. Scarce and unexpected then, rare treasure in the sky. Mid Wales 40 years ago, the red kite's beauty lit the snow. Now I might see them every day, the falcon on our city cliffs, red kite by the motorway. The bird completes the skyline, that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? The pearly ring-tailed harrier, or this shooting gallery? Now the heathland is burning above the valley towns. The greedy flames consume the peat, so when the rains come down, they pour across the moorland wreck and overwhelm the stream and beck, and overwhelm the stream and beck, and flood the towns again. And the bird completes the skyline, and that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? A life-supporting landscape, or this wasteful cruelty? The bird completes the skyline, that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? The pearly ring-tailed harrier, or this shooting gallery?
What a beautiful song. What a beautiful voice that he has. And an incredible skill in terms of songwriting as well. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning, isn't it?
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And also written to demand.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Martin has an empathy for the natural world, as we've said, a great fondness for birds in particular. But, you know, when I rang him up and said, Martin, is there any chance you could? To turn out something like that is just absolutely phenomenal. Again, it exemplifies his skills as a songwriter. Really, really fantastic. I'm sure he'll be performing live. If you get the chance, then pop along. He's got a whole host of different recordings which you can see. This one he put out last year when we were locked down, and he did some recording at home. It's got some great songs on, a few cover versions on there, a couple of Bob Dylan classics which he puts his own slant on, which are truly fantastic. But yeah, Martin, what can we say? Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic stuff.
Now, in true Hen Harrier Day style, we have some t-shirts available for you to take a look at. Now, I have to say, this whole show has been put together and directed by the remarkable Lucy Lapwing, or Lucy Hodson's her real name, but we all call her Lucy Lapwing. I'm sure you all know her. But I have to say, a secret skill of hers is that she's a pretty remarkable artist as well. So she's actually done the graphic designs for these t-shirts, so let's take a little look at them now. Of course, they're all Hen Harrier related, and with strong messages about conserving and supporting our uplands. Save our sky dancers. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful t-shirt. So this is the one design that we have at the moment, but there's lots of other t-shirts and jumpers and various other things that are available, and all the money that's being raised will go directly towards funding wild justice, and that can be found on chrispackham.store. So head over there if you fancy getting yourself a little bit of t-shirts.
And we should say that all of these t-shirts are ethically made, ethically sourced and ethically paid for. They're put together by T-Mill, and if you want to look at their credentials, you won't find any higher than that. So you can rest assured that you're adding positively to people's lives and protecting the environment whilst you're investing in a new t-shirt with a very simple message on it. chrispackham.store, monies to wild justice, top stuff. Okay, let's move on to our next point of concern now. Very sadly, in the UK, there's still a lot of lead in the environment. Now, we've got rid of lead in our pipes some time ago. We got rid of lead in our paint some time ago. We got rid of lead in our petrol in my living lifetime because we recognise that this substance is incredibly dangerous, and ingesting even very small quantities of it can cause, well, basically a reduction in our brain power, particularly in children. So the idea that every year people would go out into the environment and fire vast quantities of lead into that environment with the potential that it can get both into the wild animal and the human food chain strikes me as absurd.
Bizarre.
It's
really weird.
A bit bonkers. Let's join Mark Avery now for issue number 5 of our Hen Harrier Day countdown. He's going to be talking to Julia Newth from the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust. Mark.
We've got to number 5 in our countdown, and that's lead ammunition. Now, lead's a poison. That's why we've got rid of it from water pipes, from petrol, from paint, from fishing weights, but we still use it for ammunition for recreational shooting, including shooting into things like red grouse and pheasants and partridges, which sometimes we eat. Seems a bit odd to me, but for an expert's view, we're going to talk to Julia Newth from the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, because they've done a lot of work on this, so let's hear what she has to say.
We all know that lead is highly toxic. It's been removed from petrol, from paint and from pipes because there are no safe levels. But in the UK, thousands of tonnes of lead ammunition are fired over the countryside every single year into areas where birds are feeding, and this exposes them to this potent neurotoxin. Birds often ingest lead when they're feeding on bits of seed and grit, and they often mistake the small lead shots for seed and grit. Raptors and scavengers become poisoned when they feed on prey that's also embedded with lead ammunition. So this is a really, really, really big issue, and unfortunately it culminates in mass mortality and mass sickness of our wild birds. Physiological impacts range from impacts on the nervous system, impacts on the reproductive system, the vascular system and the renal systems as well. It's a huge, huge detrimental impacts to our bodies, and unfortunately we're not exempt from these impacts. We are putting our own health at risk when we eat wild game that's shot with lead ammunition. But there is a simple solution, and that's using non-toxic alternatives to lead ammunition. And some countries are making great progress with this already. Denmark, for example, banned lead shot for their shooting 20 years ago, and hunting is thriving there at the moment. In the UK, we have partial restrictions on the use of lead ammunition in the different countries, but unfortunately, compliance with these regulations has been found to be extremely poor. In some regions, more than 70% of non-compliance has been found. More and more hunters are wishing to clean up their sport and move away from lead ammunition, but unfortunately, change is really difficult and there's a lot of progress to be made. Last year, the shooting sector announced a voluntary ban on the use of lead ammunition in the UK. And although we welcome this, unfortunately, this initiative has yet to yield obvious benefits. One study by the University of Cambridge has found that more than 99% of pheasants that they bought from shops and game dealers still contain lead ammunition, so there's still an awful long way to go. Change is really, really hard. And really there is only one clear solution to this, and that is the full regulation of lead ammunition to protect our health. Change is coming. In January, the EU banned the use of lead shot in all its wetlands, and a wider restriction on the use of lead ammunition and fishing weights proposed by the European Chemicals Agency is currently in progress. Many shooters no longer want to be associated with poisoning, and now is the time for us all to come together and move towards a lead-free, zero pollution future for the health of wildlife and people.
Thank you very much for that, Julia. I mean, why are we still shooting lead pellets into the environment? I have to say, this isn't a real lead pellet. I'm not holding lead in my hands. This is one that we have just made as a representative. But why are we still doing this? We've just heard of all the detrimental impacts that lead has. I mean, millions of these are shot into the UK countryside every single year. And of course, upon impact, it scatters and lots of different pellets enter the body of these animals. And even when we're eating those animals, even though there might not be the lead pellets in there, there's lots of lead trace as well. So it's an incredibly dangerous thing to have in our environment. And from my perspective, it should just be a given. It should be an obvious thing that we just immediately ban lead and look at other alternatives.
Well, Justice took some samples last year from various supermarkets from game meat, and we found that some of the samples were many thousands of times over the European legal guidelines for lead. What's interesting in the UK is that when it comes to game animals, this is unbelievable as well, when it comes to game animals, there are no legally set limits for the amount of lead that you might encounter in them when they enter the food chain. There are for other domestic animals, chickens, so on and so forth, but not game animals. There's what seems to be almost a contrived loophole there, so that you don't have to satisfy any food safety standards when lead goes into the food chain. Well, we did those samples last year, and we exposed the fact that some of our leading supermarkets were selling food which was actually just poisonous, toxic. There's no ambiguity about that. We might as well just say it as it is. And all I can say to you is that while Justice, again, next winter, we'll be taking further samples of, processed game produce and also game animals from a wide selection of supermarkets over the UK to expose the fact that those supermarkets are putting their customers at risk by selling them food which is full of lead.
And knowingly doing so as well, because all of those figures have now been published and are available for you to go and read. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look. But if you are as outraged as we are about these issues and the rest that you've heard this morning, then I please urge you to go and sign our e-action. It really only takes a couple of seconds to do. All you have to do is go to wildjustice.org.uk/act. Click a couple buttons, put in your postcode and sign that letter. It really goes such a long way. And I have to say, since we started the broadcast, we've got 400 emails so far, but we want to see that number continue to rise, over 400. So we want to see it keep going up. I don't know, how many do you want to get to by the end?
1,000 by the end of the programme.
1,000 would be good, wouldn't it? 1,000 would be good.
1,000 letters.
Go and, text your neighbour, call your aunt, call your grandma, ask your postman, I don't know, whoever's coming around, whoever you've got on your phone book. Get sharing, click on social media, because sharing goes a long way. So don't just sign, make sure that you tell everyone about it as well, because the more signatures, the better.
Now we're motivating, we hope, some change this morning through discussion and through educating ourselves through experts like Dr. Julia Newth there, telling us a little bit more about lead. This should allow us to make better informed decisions in the future. We can think about that and we can know that, but as I was speaking to Megan earlier, sometimes it's nice to express how we feel about things. And there's no doubt that our uplands and the wildlife that lives there has a very strong capacity to change the way that people feel, because as we've seen this morning, our artists can respond to that in song and in also the way that they paint. And we've got a number of artists who've contributed work to our Hen Harrier Day this year, and I'm very pleased to show you the work of another. Now, this remarkable painting was done a few years ago now by Darren Rees, and Darren Rees is a brilliant, I would say, bird artist. He paints all sorts of wildlife artist, lives up in Scotland. I met him at Southampton University many years ago. He studied maths actually. He was quite good at maths, I think, but he's a brilliant painter, and he's gone on to a world-renowned reputation as a wildlife painter. Anyway, this is a male hen harrier flying over Ashley Walk in the New Forest here, and as soon as I saw it I fell in love with it, and I bought the painting from him. And as I've often told him, and I think it's fair to say, when the house catches fire, I might grab a few things. I'm going to grab Sid and Nancy. I might grab you if you're around at the time.
Nice.
But if I had to throw a picture out the window to make sure that it was going to last forever, it would be this one. I've always loved this painting. Darren has very generously said that we could have some prints made of this, and this is one of those prints. And I've got to say, and I'll put my glasses on to examine it in detail, it's beautifully done. Yeah. It's a lovely print of the original oil on board painting which he produced here. And at the end of the programme we are going to tell you how you can get your hands on one of these signed prints, all profits going to Wild Justice. So a massive vote of thanks to Darren Rees for allowing us to replicate his work and very generously giving all of the profits of that to the work that Wild Justice is doing to try and improve things in our uplands. It's a very, very beautiful painting. I might leave it to you in my will.
Really?
Do you want it or not?
Quite a lot. Yeah, I love it. I would love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might think about that.
Think about it.
Yeah.
It's better than I thought. I thought it would just be an immediately no.
Yeah, well, I've left you a few interesting things in my will. I mean, I've left you my poo collection, obviously. One or two of the items from my skull collection.
One or two?
Yeah.
Why not the whole bunch? Who else is going to use your skulls?
Not all of them.
What do you mean not all of them?
Well, a few people want to get their hands on those skulls. So I'm going to split them up a little
Who
bit.
wants? I have to have words.
It's all being exposed now, isn't it?
Anyway, look, wants your skulls? I've got dibs on those skulls. I have done since I was 2.
You don't need to wait for me to die to get your hands on a copy of this fantastic painting. You'll be able to do that at the end of the programme. Moving on.
Moving on with our countdown, we're on to issue number 4. Now, of course, when we talk about Hen Harrier Day, we've got the flagship, the Hen Harrier. But underneath that is a whole wealth of biodiversity, or I should say lack of wealth of biodiversity when it comes to driven grouse shooting. And to tell us a little bit about that, Mark is going to introduce Dr. Alex Lees to tell us a little bit about the impact biodiversity and driven grouse shooting has.
Alex, I'm going to have to play devil's advocate here and ask you a very fundamental question. About biodiversity, it's become the hallowed grail for conservation. It's the thing that we dream of maximising all of the time. And to you and I, it's great because we immerse ourselves in it. But what about everyone else? Why does biodiversity matter so much to the man, woman and child on the street?
So biodiversity underpins a lot of the life support systems on planet Earth. We talk about biodiversity and we talk about carbon. Well, we're sitting on a bog, standing on sphagnum moss here, which is part of biodiversity, and that biodiversity will decompose and eventually become peat. And we're standing on this huge reservoir of peat, which is probably keeping us from dangerous climate change. And we think we need to be maximising the amount of this sphagnum moss and the amount of extent of this moss on this bog to be stocking and locking in more carbon. But fundamentally, without that web of life, then the chances of fitting sort of 8 billion people on a planet become vanishingly small.
Okay, so if we can put an end to the burning and the very obvious destruction of these sorts of habitats as they stand, we have got a toolkit here which we can put in place and turn this environment into something much better.
Indeed, yes. So I think we need to be working with farmers and with landowners rather than against them. I mean, as a conservation biologist, what I worry about is land cover rather than land use, for instance. So I would tolerate less intensive forms of field sports activity, for instance, that have a net biodiversity gain, for instance. I certainly can cope with wildlife-friendly farming if we can make that happen. If we can work with farmers to produce, some wildlife-friendly meat, if you like, well, that would be a good thing.
So, one last question. If I were to give you a lamp and you were to rub it, you only get the one wish though. What would you wish for in this landscape in terms of its appearance and its productivity at some stage in the foreseeable future, perhaps even in our lifetimes?
So here, sitting on top of a moor right on the top of the Peak District, I think the landscape is beginning to look like one which we'd want. We've got massive increases in breeding waders, we've got increases in the biodiversity of the flora, for instance. So it's been a story locally, at least, of biodiversity slowly creeping back up the slopes and slowly appearing back in these sites here. So although it's very easy to sort of look at the uplands and say, well, it's terrible, had we been here 30 or 40 years ago, the situation was far worse. So we are slowly perhaps moving in the right direction, but arguably need to move in that direction much, much quicker and invest in peatland restoration, because it's by far one of the most efficient ways of locking in carbon. And this restoration, these blanket bogs, is the immediate goal here. And with that, it's sort of build it and they will come, I'd expect. I'd certainly hope to see hen harriers again nesting in this area in the not too distant future, if not even visits by marsh harriers, which we get to this day, or even recolonisation by Montagu's harriers, for instance. So there's all sorts of possibilities for recolonisation for species. So it's amazing what will show up just when given a chance.
Amazing amount of...
Poignant points.
Yeah, amazing. Go on then. Favourite upland bird?
Oh, I don't know. That's a pretty mean question, isn't it? Do you know what? I'd probably go with the flagship, the Hen Harrier. I know it's kind of stereotypical, right? Because we're here doing.
What about short-eared owl?
Yeah, I like owls. I do. But do you know, when I went to the Hen Harrier nest last year.
Golden eagle?
Yeah. No.
Golden plover?
Yeah. No.
Lovely call.
Loved them. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely loved them. But honestly, when I went to see the Hen Harrier nest last year, I got the opportunity to go in under licence to have a look at some chicks. They just totally stole my heart. Definitely.
Remarkable birds, no question about that.
Pretty
Probably
good.
why we chose them as a flagship, of course. Anyway, listen,
Yeah,
we've got any more
makes
questions
sense.
come in?
We've got lots of questions coming in, actually. So let's run through a couple of those ones. Let's have a little look. This is from David Gatehouse. A point that hasn't been raised thus far is that landowners all receive cash sums and tax breaks from the government. This should surely only go to sound environmental stewards, ?
Right, on both accounts, I think. We haven't mentioned it. Sorry about that, David. We're trying to squeeze in as much as we can, but we're really pleased that you've raised the issue, and it's something that we should all think about. Quite large sums of taxpayers' money are put into driven grouse moors as subsidies. The man to read and learn more about is, again, the one and only Guy Shrubsole, who that we featured earlier. He's written widely about this, so if you check out his social media accounts and online, you'll find what Guy has written about that. But yeah, it's a bit shocking, isn't it, really, that we are effectively paying for this environmental damage.
Right, let's do...
Galling, that's what it is. It's galling. That's the word I need to use here. Galling.
Word for it, isn't it? This one's from Sue C. Are there some good landowners that should be praised and used to influence the others?
Of course.
Very definitely.
Another
Very
really
definitely.
good point. Hey, these people are making really good points. I think we are coming on to this in a little while. However, of course there are good landowners.
Yeah.
There are landowners who are doing remarkable things, and we want to champion their endeavours. It's sometimes quite difficult to get the good landowners to stand up and want to be championed, because they worry about the abuse they're going to get from their neighbours. And I know that in the past we have spoken directly to people who are running grouse moors and managing the uplands in a really positive way, where their land is covered with raptors, golden eagles, hen harriers, peregrines, you name it, they've got it, and they're really pleased to have them there as well. And we've said to them, can we speak openly about the really good work that you're doing here? And they say, oh, well, it's a bit tricky because obviously our neighbours are not quite so keen and we have to get on with everyone. But I think we'll get to a tipping point when there's going to be so much kudos associated with doing the right thing that people won't care about being, influenced by those people who are doing the wrong thing.
Well, we experienced that just a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? We were up in Cairngorms, in Scotland, and we went to visit a place that is hosting Cairngorms Connect, and another amazing rewilding project, and some people there who are talking openly about this kind of reformation of the landscape. And I have to say they're doing the most amazing job. Driving around the Cairngorms, you know, is a geographically stunning place, but I had to say I was left pretty shocked by how bare it was until I got to that location and met those incredible people who are doing their utmost to protect biodiversity and, you know, restore the land, and that's all thanks to one brilliant landowner.
Yeah.
So,
it is.
you know, there are great people out there.
It certainly is. And it's not that there isn't a future for hunting and shooting in that environment. It's just that the practices of hunting and shooting need to be changed so that they're sustainable, and that environment can be shared by people who want to hunt and shoot and people who want to camp and shoot their cameras and everything else. And that's the long-term aim of those sorts of projects. Anyway, should we move on? Was there any,
well, we have one more thing. We have one more thing. Lots of people are asking whether this broadcast is going to be available to watch after the live stream has ended. Absolutely, yes it will. You can head over to the YouTube channels. It will all be there for you to be able to find and rewatch as many times as you like. Why not?
Okay, and I must take this opportunity to very quickly ask you, if you haven't already done so, go to wildjustice.org.uk/act and sign our e-action today. We're trying to get to 1,000 letters going to 1,000 of our elected representatives by the end of this broadcast. We're running a little bit over time, so we are going to speed things up, but I can tell you 700 people. So we've gone up by 300. Come on, that's only another 300 to go before we get to 1,000. It'd be great to top that. Now I'm just going to nip forward here because I've got another great piece of art to show you. We've had Darren Rees.
I love this.
We've now got. Do you want to take that bit of paper, and I can show you this one. Maybe you can hold the other side because I don't want to spoil this. Look at this. This was a piece of work which we commissioned specifically again for Hen Harrier Day from another of our friends, the one and only Darren Woodhead. Darren Woodhead is another bird artist in the UK. His ability to capture the subtle nuances of the birds is absolutely phenomenal. The shapes and forms seem to magically transform from nature onto the page whenever he picks up his brush, as you can see here. And he went out to a site quite close to him where he was able to sketch hen harriers in the field. I've got to say, that's the way he likes to work. Darren sketches in the field, Darren Rees, that we've already seen, but he also likes to work in a studio. I think the majority of Darren Woodhead's work is done outside in the field.
He's always sat under a tree. I went to Malta with him and he was sat under lots of trees then painting, and he's just got, you know, the most incredible talent.
Sat under a tree, sat under a brolly.
He's under a brolly often, you know, but sometimes the rainwater.
And hold on, do you remember when he actually went underwater? Yes,
no.
You've got to check that out. Darren Woodhead painting watercolours underwater.
How would you even do that?
No, seriously, it's worth watching. Wow. He's not only imaginative in terms of his capacity to create art, but also in the means of doing it as well. So look, let's see Darren in action now. This is him when we sent him out to transform his the way that he feels about hen harriers onto the page using his paints.
Here you're working on hen harriers. So we've got a nest here with 5 fledged young, which is just fantastic. God, when we first came, the female literally just flew over the road with prey. She'd been hunting on the hill, and that was the first thing we had this morning, just as the rays of the sun were coming up. Just lovely colours, just a lovely scene with meadowpipits and skylarks flushing around her. All my kids are into nature as well. I suppose they could not be. I mean, Corin, who's with me today, he's a mad bird watcher, and it's so nice to see young folk just enjoying what's around us, and again just really appreciating the natural world that's here. Takes me back to childhood, because my first ever hen harrier was, we used to watch a reservoir in Leeds, where I'm from, and we once had this flush of meadowpipits. We didn't expect it at all, and then this ringtail hen harrier just came floated in front of us, and it was just the most amazing thing, as that was my first ever hen harrier. Gosh. If only that was hope, if only you could guarantee those birds would make it through, eh? When it comes to harriers, the way they're floating, often like falling autumn leaves, the young ones when they come down, it's just so lovely. I suppose that's kind of what I'm after. I'm after trying just to capture that shape that's there of the bird. I think painting for me is always, it's my way of recording and my way of seeing, and I think we've all got different ways maybe that we see. I've always had it. I've always had this thing where I need to do something, I need to react to it, I need to make a mark, and then it's processed. I've got some shapes that I really like, so I've seen them, I've done it, I've achieved, and that's what I'm here for. Yeah, you think a balanced ecosystem, a balanced site should allow predator and prey. That's the way surely life should work. It just seems so unnecessary when you have something that's meant to be here. Wouldn't this be nice if this was the scene that we walked out onto anymore, I suppose, and have this amazing scene? So maybe this is my dream. Maybe it's a dream on a page. At the moment it's almost like a desperate dream on a page, but wouldn't it be nice if it was a dream and if it was reality on a page, I suppose. Yeah, gorgeous birds.
Fantastic stuff.
So talented.
Yeah.
So talented.
And he had a sunny day.
I know.
Hey, what happened there?
I know.
When we were up there,
Unheard of,
it was less than sunny. Here is a copy of Darren's work, and just like the other artist, Jamie and Darren Rees, he has very kindly allowed us to reproduce this. So we have a limited edition run of numbered and signed prints, which we will be making available to you at the end of our programme. So you'll be able to get your hands on this, and I'm equally pleased, as I was with Jamie, to be able to tell you that she is Darren Woodhead, has very kindly allowed us to sell the original as well, which we will be doing in an auction. So just to be clear, the prints will have a fixed price, details to follow at the end. We want everyone to have an equal opportunity of getting these, which is why we're going to announce the site that you can visit to purchase them at the end. And then the original painting we are going to run as an auction with all profits to Wild Justice. So we've got that to come. Absolutely sensational, isn't it?
Good opportunities, but we should get on with the issues
Fabulous.
at hand perhaps. And this is issue number three now. Now, of course, when we're talking about driven grouse shooting, it's very much about the people, and we've been asking you to go ahead and sign that petition, make your voice and your signature count. But if you haven't done so already, please make sure you do. But of course, the other end of the scale is political action too. We need policies to change. We need government to get behind us and help lead the way into a more sustainable and healthy environment. Now, to tell us a little bit more about that, Mark went to visit MP Olivia Blake. So take it away, Mark and Olivia.
Olivia, you were a student in Sheffield, and now you're the MP for Sheffield Hallam, and your constituency goes from middle of Sheffield right up onto the moors. So this is a local issue for you, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's one that I know a lot of my constituents are really passionate about, and it's really great to represent such a diverse area, because we do have that really special landscape of the moorlands, but also we go right into the city centre.
Now, you've spoken in a couple of parliamentary debates about burning in the uplands and about grouse shooting, and you've put forward the Labour Party view that grouse shooting should be licensed. So why do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I think there's huge issues with the way the land is currently managed with burning, and I was really pleased to secure one of those debates to have that argument in Parliament. But I think we really need to look at ways that we can bring that management more under control. I actually tabled an amendment to the Environment Bill to ban all burning, because the pressure that we have been putting on has brought about a partial ban of burning, but it doesn't go far enough, and it still will cause a huge amount of environmental damage. And licensing of grouse shooting, I think, is really, really important, just because the persecution of birds and birds of prey has just been getting worse and worse and worse over the years, and something needs to be done to bring the landowners and gamekeepers under control.
With the Conference of the Parties on Climate Change, where the UK is hosting a meeting in Glasgow in the autumn, we want to look good to the rest of the world, don't we? And yet those massive peat stores in the uplands at the moment are still being burned.
Our peatlands are so precious. They're our rainforests, and they store as much carbon as all the forests of the UK, Germany and France. So, we don't know how lucky we are to have peatlands in this country, and I think that if more people knew about peatlands, more people would want to protect them. I've been calling for a ban on burning for a long time, and I was really pleased that the government seemed to be listening, and then horrified when I saw the details of their introduction of a ban, because it just did not go far enough. It kind of got very technocratic about the depth of peat, which is just a nonsense for those of us who know that our peat is in a poor condition and degrading all the time. And actually what is needed is exactly what the CCC have called for, which is the Committee for Climate Change. They've recently brought out a recent report calling for the protection and restoration of 100% of our peatlands and uplands. And you know, the reason they do that is because of the millions of tonnes of carbon which could be unlocked if we don't do something. And that is so critical to not only the ecological but climate elements of the crises that we're facing at the moment. I think that the government should do a lot more. I think we've got an opportunity with the Environment Bill to keep on pushing this. We called, as the Labour Party, for a complete ban on burning, and I think that is essential if we're going to take these issues seriously in the way that we need to.
Thank you very much, Olivia and Mark, for that conversation. I always find it really inspiring to hear Olivia speak, because it's so nice to know that there is some political will out there to make the changes that are necessary for our environment, and she always speaks so brilliantly about it as well. So thank you very, very much for that. Now, our e-petition, our e-action is nearing 800. Come on, you know you want to, bump it up over that level. We want at least 1,000, I think, by the time we end, and we've got a few more minutes, a few more guests and a few more things to get through, so I'm hoping, I've got everything crossed, that we'll hit that. So and again, go on to wildjustice.org.uk/act. It takes a couple seconds to sign that e-petition, put your name, make your voice count, and then of course share it with all your friends as well.
Excellent stuff. Okay, moving on our list now. We're going to try and speed things up as we're overstaying our welcome.
Yes, and we do that.
Sorry.
We overstay quite a lot. Sorry,
yeah,
everyone.
Too much banter.
We're taking up your Saturdays.
Too much banter from us. But we have another live guest we're really pleased to welcome from Scotland, the big picture, Gus Routledge. Gus is an ecologist, and we're going to talk to Gus about carbon, because looking after our carbon stores is implicitly important for all of our futures. And one of the ways we can do that is addressing some of the issues that are taking place in our uplands. Gus, are you there with us this morning? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm indeed coming
Gus.
to you from the Scottish Highlands. I was going to be in a 150-year-old pinewood, but I couldn't get the reception to get that sorted for you.
That is a shame, but we'd love to have seen your pinewood.
Yeah.
Gus, before we get started, just very briefly, give us a bit of an outline about Scotland, the big picture, its aims and objectives.
So Scotland, the Big Picture is an organisation. We recently became a charity, and really we're about trying to enact change, moving towards a wilder landscape for people and nature, obviously. All about ecological restoration, rewilding. And really it is all about bringing people with us and making sure that Scotland is a healthier landscape for people and nature, as I've said.
Very creative as well. You're armed with some of the UK's best wildlife photographers and filmmakers when it comes to producing the material there, but also a legacy of people like Pete Cairns, who's working with you. He's a man that's always wanted to keep dialogue open between, various factions. He doesn't like that polarisation which has so sadly gripped these sorts of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crucial that, you've used the word sides earlier, I know reluctantly, obviously because it shouldn't be about sides. This is about everybody's future. We're all moving forwards in this world. We've got lots of problems to deal with, and dealing with them in a sort of proactive way, collaboratively, is definitely the way to go. And for lack of a better phrase again, trying to bring the other side with us, I think, is crucial. It's just going to make everything much easier for everybody involved.
It's really difficult though, isn't it? I mean, starting these conversations is the real difficult thing. I mean, what do you think of the solutions for that?
Oh, tricky. So I'm obviously, being a young person, I'm quite involved on social media, and I see a lot of the, fracas that goes on, happens often on social media. Whereas when I've met people in the field and been able to talk to them in person, showing them things, listen to their opinions, it's just been a much easier, freer flowing conversation, because you're not behind the keyboard, you're actually seeing that person face to face. So I really do feel that keeping the face to face dialogue is really crucial. Yeah, because I've just found it so much easier to get points across, all the nuances that are involved. It's yeah, definitely much easier.
So, Gus, we've been talking this morning about a wide range of issues. We've mentioned burning and the potential damage that causes to our uplands. They are very important carbon stores. When we think of the Earth's carbon stores, we typically gravitate to things like the Amazon rainforest or the equatorial rainforest. We increasingly recognise that the algae floating in our seas is a very important carbon store. But here, terrestrial mammals as we are, living in the UK, on land, our uplands represent an enormous capacity to store and hold carbon and keep it out from our ever-warming atmosphere, don't they?
Absolutely. So a lot of the sites I work on, I do quite a lot of work for the peatland restoration sort of projects that are going on in Scotland. The Scottish Government recently put about £250 million towards peatland restoration, so we're certainly moving in the right direction. There's a lot of estates who are taking on this money and are very happy to see their peatlands being restored after potentially in some cases centuries of decline. And it is quite staggering once you go out into these landscapes, big sort of highland estates, especially across the Northwest Highlands, just how much of our land is covered in peat. And occasionally, unfortunately, you see where it's eroded away, but it gives you a real idea of just how deep this peat is. I was recently working on Isla earlier this year, and we recorded the deepest peat in Scotland, which I think we had, I think it was 12.6 meters deep. And I mean, that's just phenomenal amounts of carbon being stored there.
Yeah, well, a really valuable resource, isn't it? In our ever-changing climate, those environments become ever more vital to protect as well. But how do we go about protecting them and the solutions of keeping our uplands tight full of carbon?
So I think for me, what it comes down to is the fact that our entire ecosystem is really quite degraded, as we've already mentioned. The fact the UK being, I think it's 100 something out of 216 nations in terms of biodiversity intactness. It's what we've got used to. Obviously, we've got the shifting baseline syndrome. People are used to open hills and potentially even used to peat hags. But I feel that across a lot of our uplands, we're seeing landscape-wide ecological suppression rather than succession. So this is basically an ecosystem that's not functioning, it's stuck in place. So in terms of peatlands, that means actively, instead of actually actively creating peat, we're actively eroding peat. In terms of our woodlands, they're stagnant. We've got single-age trees that are potentially up to 300 years old with no young trees underneath them. Once we kickstart these processes, you're going to see a massive uptake of carbon with the trees that are establishing themselves alongside, obviously, planting trees, which is very important in many areas. The peatlands will become far healthier. We'll still have to do quite a lot of work there, still providing employment, obviously, in these areas. And hopefully we'll see a massive comeback of nature.
So, Gus, I've got to ask you a question. I was talking to Megan earlier about the way that she felt about things rather than just things that she knows and thinks. As a young person, you've already put yourself in that category. I've got to ask you, eco-anxiety is something which is afflicting many people, but particularly younger generations. How do you feel when you see the sorts of destruction taking place in these uplands, when we know that there are viable and important alternatives which we should be implementing straight away? I mean, how does that impact you on your mental state and your outlook on life?
I think the only word I can use, which still falls far short of how I feel very often, is frustration. It's beyond frustration, because I'm walking about these places going, this could be so much more, and we're getting so little from such marginal land. It could become, I can't really put it into words. And there are times when I spend an awful lot of my time in nature. It's for work, but also very much for play. And there are times when I'm going out and I'm like, okay, I want to go and see something cool, and I'll be walking to the site and just walking through whatever it is I'm walking through, whether that's deer forest or grouse moor. It can completely put a dampener on my day. Often I'll find what I'm looking for, and that perks me up a bit, just knowing that there is hope and that nature will absolutely rebound if we give it the chance to. I think people would be really surprised at just how quickly nature can recover. So whilst there's an awful lot of frustration, there's an awful lot of hope. And even in places where, as I think you guys mentioned, one of the estates you're on in Kimgroves Connect area, there's grouse moor butts in amongst the trees there. I'm not saying we need to get rid of grouse moors completely. If we want to, the nature will absolutely recover and retake its sort of place in the landscape. And I think it's about addressing that balance. Currently, we're way down on the biodiversity and nature and ecological intactness, and way up on intensive land management from various factions. So yeah, I think to summarise, vast frustration, but enough hope to keep you going.
Yeah, I think
Excellent.
I can definitely relate to that one. Vast frustration, but hopeful as well. And I think younger generations are hopeful, looking forward as well. But thank you very much, Gus. That was brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you for
Gus.
having me.
Do check out Scotland, the Big Picture. They produce some excellent publications, I've got to say, and they are backed with some fabulous photographers as well, which can display the intact part of our landscape, the glorious part of that landscape, and the species that live in it in a fabulous way. Really, really good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely
E-Action.
brilliant. E-Action.
What are we on at the moment? Any
What are we
ideas?
on?
We're asking to
can
get
get
to 1,000 by the end. We're asking you to visit wildjustice.org.uk/act and send a very polite and broadly structured letter to your elected representative in order to instigate some positive change. So if you haven't signed that already, then do so. We're going to move on to another one of our artists now, though.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one.
Hey, come on.
I'm excited about this one.
Well, this is a gentleman who built his reputation, and a fine reputation it is too, in the field of comedy under the name Vic Reeves.
Very funny man.
Vic Reeves is really Jim Moir, and Jim, you may not know, is a fabulous artist. He's a great painter, does all sorts of different types of painting, but he's equally a very, very keen birder. He's very passionate about birds. He sometimes paints them in a quirky way, but his skills enable him to paint them very, very beautifully as well. And I've got one of the paintings here. Well, this is a print again, and he's painting a food pass here between the male and the female. It's again, like the Dowans and Jamies, an accomplished piece of art. He's allowed us to again produce a series of prints and to sell the original. Details will be coming up in a moment. But before we head towards that, let's take a look at Jim in action producing this beautiful piece of work.
What I'm doing here is painting these two Hen Harriers, which are doing a food pass in the sky. The male, this is a practice one, which I actually really like, but it was a practice for the one that I'm doing now over there. That's the male doing a food pass to the female. So that was the practice one, and this is the real one. I may end up using the practice one, see which one's the best. But what I'm using is watercolour paints, and the problem with doing watercolour in fine hot sun like this is it dries really quickly, so you've got to work really fast. Come and have a look. So what I'm doing is I use these Chinese brushes for watercolour, which are really good because you can get a lot of water in them, which is just what you need. And then this is the food pass. That looks like he's caught this bird and he's chucking it over to her so she can take it to the chicks. The salt crystals grab hold of the paint and you get this effect, which is kind of like this, which is a sort of mottled effect, which I really like. So you're going to put that on, then wait for it all to dry. And the final few strokes now. Get a bit of salt on it, and then if you don't like the painting, you could lick it and get a kind of salty effect. Hen Harriers, the male and the female doing a food pass. I've I've purposefully not
got a visitor.
Not given, not used those dazzling bright eyes that you get on a hen harrier, because I want them to be a bit anonymous, representing their flight and their plight. And that's the practice one. But which is the best? See, I've made a bit of a mess here, but kind of like that as well. Anyway, there we are. Thank you for your attention.
Brilliant stuff from Jim.
Incredible, isn't it? I love the texture of this piece. It's kind of like this rusty kind of colours that just bring the birds to life. I think it's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, you're right. The texture and the way that the paint's formed inside the female here and that part of the male around the back there is absolutely delightful and really exquisite. I tell you what, hold that. It's so delightful and so exquisite. I have to emulate my mentor by warming my trousers. I'm so excited about this.
I don't understand the trouser rubbing thing. I can't watch you do it anymore.
Well, hold on. It was Jim that started it. I'm merely a disciple. Now, I've also got massive shirt envy, I have to say.
Yeah.
I might put a bid on his shirt, because we've come to that point where we are going to open our sales of the prints and the auctions too. So look, I'm just going to nip to one side here to get the others that we've got.
Get all the artwork
Here
out.
we are.
Here we are.
There we are. So if you can hold that one as well, that's Jamie's. You've got there,
Jamie's.
up the wrong way, and I've got these two. It's going to be difficult to double display the Darrens without.
Double Darren.
Try not to damage the prints whilst I'm doing it. There we are. What a fantastic spread of art we've got for you. And if you're interested in purchasing any of these prints, then the links are in the chat now. You can click on those. There are 25 of each of the prints available, and the auction is open to be able to purchase these 3 pieces of artwork, the originals of those. All profits from print sales and the artwork itself go to Wild Justice. What a brilliant spread that is. Some fabulous art by some fabulous and very, very generous artists. Thank you to all of them.
Yes.
And do get clicking on those links that are in the chat now if you would like one of these. Think of that as a birthday present, as a Christmas present. Hey?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. Yeah.
Hold on.
You could do a bit better on your Christmas presents, to be honest.
This is coming from you?
Yeah.
Coming from a person who I didn't get a Christmas or birthday present from for years.
Yes, you did.
I did not.
Rubbish. Well, I got loads of dead flies one year.
Dead flies are good.
I got dead fly. Honestly, I'm not kidding. I genuinely did get dead flies. That
Give me these.
Got off the surface.
Honestly.
That was an interesting one. Anyway, we have a bit of a celebration right now because 1,200 of you have signed our e-action. So thank you so much to everyone who's done it already. If you haven't yet, what are you waiting for? It takes a few seconds. Go to wildjustice.org.uk/act. But 1,200.
That's pretty good. In fact, I'm going to raise the bar.
Good. Oh, go on.
Well, we've got a couple more films to go. And then I think we can make it to 1,500.
Yeah, let's go 15.
Come on.
Why not?
Let's go to 15.
Aim
Get
high.
on your phones, text a few of your mates, say surely you've got to be wanting to do this. Let's get those letters out to those elected representatives, 1,500 by the end of the programme. And we are moving in that direction.
Yes. Well, we are very much moving in that direction because we have one issue left to talk about. And now this is the one that captures a lot of headlines. It's really emotive and it's a really powerful topic. I bet actually it's probably some of the reason why you're all with us watching. And of course that is raptor persecution. Now, to tell us a little bit more about that, the 3 Wild Justice teams, including Chris, Ruth Tingay and Mark Avery, went along on a walk. Now, they went along to talk to people with raptor persecution. They spoke to Jamie Shelton, of the investigations officer at the RSPB, Jenny Shelton, Matt Hagan from North Yorkshire Police, and Steve Downing from the Northern England Raptor Forum. So that's a pretty amazing walk. I would have liked to have been a fly on that walk myself, but see a little bit more about how that conversation went. A fly on a walk. You know, I can't be a fly on a wall because there's no walls on a walk.
The modification of a fly on a wall to a fly on a walk.
Fly on a walk.
That's quite good.
Exactly.
I might use that.
That's what I'm here for. Any day. I'm here to the end of the day. Anyway, let's have a little listen to that talk about raptor persecution.
So we've got to issue number 1. I bet you've guessed what it is. You're right, it's raptor persecution. We know that hen harriers are illegally killed on grouse moors in the uplands of Britain, and that's a big problem for them, and it's a wildlife crime. It's not just hen harriers, birds like eagles in Scotland, buzzards, peregrine falcons, goshawks, lots of other species are killed as well, and that's terrible in this day and age. We've talked to a whole range of experts about wildlife crime, and they are Matt Hagan from the North Yorkshire Police, Jenny Shelton from the RSPB Investigations team, and Steve Downing from the Northern England Raptor Forum, and they all know their stuff, so let's hear from them.
Jenny, I celebrated my 60th birthday this year. I never imagined that I'd get to this age and we'd still be confronted with the level of raptor persecution that we've got. I thought it was something, when I was a kid that we would grow up and get rid of, but we haven't, have we?
No, it's true. It's something that seems like it doesn't have a place in modern life, but yet it's still happening. We're seeing every year with the data that we produce at the RSPB, confirmed incidents are steady. The problem is not going away. Luckily, more people are becoming aware of this, but certainly it needs urgently addressing. The government needs to step in and act before more birds are lost.
And in terms of the types of persecution, have we seen any changes in that?
It's always hard to say, because what we're seeing is just the reported detected incidents. So it's only really the tip of an iceberg, and there's probably a lot more, well, there's certainly a lot more that we never find. But yeah, shooting does seem to be the prevalent method of choice, unfortunately, finding lots of birds being shot, often in connection with driven grouse shooting.
Is this persecution having any impact on the birds' population? Is it a real threat to their ability to maintain their numbers, or is it preventing them from increasing their numbers, do you think?
It is. It's another thing that's now known, is that human persecution is the factor that's artificially suppressing the population.
Okay, well, given that this has been going on for hundreds of years and it's been going on throughout the course of our lifetimes, the million-dollar but very difficult question is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, this is a really big question. I think public awareness is helping. The more people are finding out about this, they're naturally astonished and appalled that this is happening. Right under our noses often. But we also need that top-down legislation. I think the government needs to step in.
Okay, what can we do proactively if we want to get up in the morning and make a difference?
What people can do for investigations is be our eyes and ears, basically. We rely very heavily on reports from the public. If you see anything suspicious, particularly a dead or an injured raptor, which may look like it's died in suspicious circumstances, give us a call, ring the police on 101 as well. Many of the cases that actually end up ultimately in court have begun that way, just by somebody out walking the dog, noticing something and giving us a call. But yeah, we're certainly never going to stop fighting this issue, and ultimately we want to make sure that hen harriers remain in our skies, that these places remain rich in life for future generations.
Matt, you're an inspector with North Yorkshire Police, and you've been investigating wildlife crime for a couple of years now.
I was the former head of the Rural Task Force for North Yorkshire Police for about 18 months, and our role was to look at rural crime and wildlife crime. There's been all sorts of different types of raptor persecution. We've had peregrines found in quarries, we've had buzzards shot on farmland, but I would say that the majority have been in and around grouse moors. We put an awful lot of work into this type of investigation, and just recently we have also put an awful lot of money into these forensic analysis of samples, trying to find the evidence if it's there. As the police, we have to prove things beyond reasonable doubt to get it to a court.
As well as your role as an inspector with North Yorkshire Police, you're also the new chair of something called the RPPDG. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, that's the Raptor Persecution Priority Delivery Group. Now, the National Wildlife Crime Unit has national priorities, and each of the priorities has a priority delivery group. So there's one for badgers, there's one for bats, there's one for poaching, and there's one for raptor persecution. And the former head of the National Wildlife Crime Unit asked me if I would be chair of that group.
I've been quite critical of the RPPDG for years, because I haven't seen it achieve anything at all of any use in all that time. What are you going to do differently to make it work?
We're looking at prevention, enforcement and intelligence. I'm looking to bring in training for the CPS lawyers and for magistrates, and also I've got representatives lined up for each of the 7 police regions in England and Wales to be a part of that group, which previously they weren't.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, I wish you the best of luck with it, and we look forward to seeing what comes out of that group.
Thanks very much.
Seeing a hen harrier ought to be a commoner experience than it is today, and yet we're told that there's not that much persecution goes on, some people say, and it's only a few bad apples, really.
No, it's not.
Can that be true?
No, Mark, that's not true at all. There are bad apples, but there's a significant number of bad apples. And when you look at the crime statistics, they are spread far and wide, and they're having a devastating impact on some of these species. The shooting industry need to front that and say, okay, we've got a big problem here and we need to deal with it, unless the government deals with it. Our government, our statutory nature conservation organisation said this is an issue. 72% of tag birds are dying on or near a grouse moor if they spend the last week there. And I don't think it's a great leap of logic to say if 72% of tagged ones are dying, 72% of untagged ones are dying.
So if things have to change, what would you like to see change to rule out a lot more of this wildlife crime?
First of all, the sentencing guidelines, the Act itself has to change. It needs amending to give the police greater powers, and that comes from sentencing guidelines. After that, the sentencing guidelines need to change so that the people see that there's a point of £75,000 penalty. If you find
sounds like a lot, £5,000.
It is a lot, but when you're only being fined 500 or 100 or nothing, then it's irrelevant, absolutely irrelevant. You know, I mean, if you take 4 peregrine eggs, you can look at a £20,000 fine.
Well, where do you personally come out on the issue of, you know, letting everything continue, licensing, a ban, vicarious liability? Got any thoughts on those things?
Vicarious liability, definitely. After that, I think politically we won't get to a ban in one step. I think that's the bigger problem. Licensing is the intermediate step that a government may go for.
I agree. And it's possible that licensing will work, but it's also possible that it won't work. And if it doesn't work, move to a ban?
Move to a ban. Move to a ban. Absolutely move to a ban.
Hey, did you see that sparrowhawk?
That sparrowhawk?
Yeah.
That sparrowhawk?
Yeah.
Chris, if you can't tell the difference between a linnet and a sparrowhawk, then quite frankly, you have no authority talking about the countryside whatsoever.
Sorry.
Utterly embarrassing.
Okay, some very there concerning raptor persecution, but we're now going to bring you, on top of that, a story about just such persecution. Ruth Tingay has been up to Scotland to cover this for us. It's a story with a long history, with lots of twists and turns. And aside from being an extraordinary story, so are the events that have taken place in it. Just have a look at this. It's the tragic tale of a young golden eagle that met a terrible end.
Can you explain a little bit about GPS tagging?
A satellite tag is essentially a quite small piece of equipment and is used by biological researchers across the globe.
What's it told you about golden eagle ecology?
It has told us a massive amount. If you think now, being able to fit these tags that give you data in real time, it's allowed us to understand the movements of golden eagles, the survival and the dispersal of these birds.
And it's also told you about where these eagles are dying, hasn't it?
The data gives us a very clear indication as to when these tags stop functioning and when birds may have been illegally killed. But you know, it's worth saying as well that we have also found birds that have died naturally, of course.
So the satellite tags that we're using on golden eagles in Scotland are the same tags that are used in other countries, on golden eagles in other countries. But the tags used in Scotland seem to have a very high sudden stop rate, don't they?
The failure rate is 25 times different here than it is in North America, which is frankly unbelievable. Of the 140 birds that have been tagged in the 12 years prior to 2017, no less than a third of those birds had disappeared in circumstances that the authors described as either suspicious or the birds had been illegally killed.
What's it like for you as a tagger when a few weeks later or a few months later or even a few years later that golden eagle just disappears in suspicious circumstances?
Knowing everything is fine with that bird and then satellite tagging it and then it goes off radar, disappears, I would say that I'm pretty hacked off, to say the least.
So we're going to be looking at the story of one particular golden eagle, but before we get there, I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about the site.
So the site is in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park, and in the 90s over 100 people were involved in going up this glen. They set up a hide up this glen and they watched this eagle constantly. And I went into the nest in 2014 and watched this sub-adult female feeding a chick. And I made moves at that time to see if I could get a satellite tag for that chick, because I thought that there would be a lot of people interested in seeing how it done.
So a few weeks after the tagging, some photographs turned up on social media accompanied by quite a bit of abuse. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I thought it was pretty unjustified. You know, my wife and my son were involved in that abuse, and I ended up going to the police about it. Pictures of my wife and my son appeared all over social media with a lot of abusive comments and basically saying things about their capabilities. You know, my wife's handled a lot of eagles, a lot of different raptors with me over the years. She's a sea permit bird ringer for the BTO as well. You know, she's done a lot of work. I consider these people cowards, absolute cowards to the nth degree. I would never do that to them, and I don't know why they did it to me.
Once this bird had fledged, what happened next?
The tag was working perfectly well. There was no indication that that tag was going to fail, and it just stopped very suddenly within this area. That bird fledged perfectly naturally, and somebody killed it.
I think it's pretty safe to assume that the bird was killed and the body disposed of very quickly, but not before the satellite transmitter was cut off. And it must have been within minutes that the perpetrator decided they were going to wrap it in this bit of lead sheeting in the belief that that would stop the transmitter from the signals from being able to be picked up by the satellite. They brought it down here and cast their package, their lead-wrapped package, over the side. Little did they know that 5 years later, last summer, a walker would discover it lying on the bank of the river just downstream from here, where it had been swept by the force of the water.
So that is going to extreme lengths to remove the evidence?
Very much so, but in actual fact that might be common. That might be happening a lot, but we just never find it. It's the perpetrator who did this must have been utterly gobsmacked when the stories of this started appearing in the media last summer.
So the Scottish Government has agreed to introduce a licensing scheme in this parliamentary session. What are you hoping that licensing scheme is going to look like?
What I hope is that it at last regulates activities going on in our uplands. Raptor persecution is probably the most glaring symptom of a whole range of unsustainable and or illegal management activities that are taking place in the uplands, usually aimed at producing vast numbers of grouse for shooting. What we need is a system where if there is evidence to link an estate, not a person, but to link an estate with criminal activity, then they face a penalty, including potentially the loss of the right to shoot. Most of these crimes are being carried out in the name of grouse shooting, so the best sanction you can have is to remove that right.
I suppose of all the things that we've discussed today, and we've broadened the approach of Hen Harrier Day in so many ways this year, at the core of it is still the impossibility for so many of us to understand why raptor persecution is still taking place, why people are still allowed to get away with it and restrict the spread of these beautiful birds, which are symbolic and totemic members of our ecosystems which need to be functional. That's what it comes down to, isn't it? That's why we're standing here in the sun. That's why so many people have got up and watched our broadcast today. That's why so many people have given so generously of their time and effort to help us put this together. We are completely bemused as to why at this point in the 21st century these birds of prey are still being ruthlessly killed in numbers that we can't really contemplate. We can only look at those satellite tagged individuals. And we know that they're the tip of an iceberg. Vast numbers of raptors are still being killed at this point in time. It's illegal, it's criminal, and it's not tenable. There's no question of that. What I don't understand, and here's a parting thought, I don't understand why the responsible, the legal, and the sustainable part of the shooting fraternity don't sort out their own bad apples. Driven grouse shooting is besmirching the reputation of all of your industry. The pressure that it's generating on that hobby that you might call a sport is growing, and it's determined. So please, rather than be divisive, let's come together to work to end this ruthless persecution, which is going to continue to generate the ire and generate the energy for those of us who want reform. Our patience has run out. You've heard about young people speaking about their frustration. We've got to put an end to this persecution. And I think that the shooting fraternity should be playing a key role in that, rather than disowning it, rather than pretending and continuing to pretend it doesn't happen. I've just seen tweets on my phone put out by some of that fraternity which are entirely disingenuous, and all they do is make people like me more angry and more determined to put an end to this practice. That's not the way to go. Be honest about what's happening and sort your own bad apples out, and then we can work together and move forward. It's been a productive morning, we hope.
Very productive.
I think we've covered a number of issues, which has been really, really good.
Yeah.
What are we up to now in terms of our e-action?
Well, I think we're nearing on 1,500, 1,500. We're almost there. Can we get to it? 1,450.
Okay,
we need
well,
50 more.
Listen, we've just got some thanks to do and to remind you of the generosity of some of our contributors. So you've got a few more seconds to try and get that up to 1,500. It's wildjustice.org.uk/act. Come on, we need just 50 more people to do that, and we've reached 1,500 letters that have gone out to our elected representatives politely and democratically and honestly asking for change. So firstly, don't forget the t-shirts. The t-shirts are available at chrispackham.store. You can get yourself one of those t-shirts, ethically produced by T-Mill, and you can find them on their website too. That's the first thing. Then we've got all of our artwork. So our generous artists, Jamie, Darren and Jim, have painted us some pictures, and you can buy the prints. They're all fixed price obviously, and you can bid on the paintings themselves in an auction, and that auction will be open, I think we're going to keep it open for around 10 days or so to make sure everyone has the opportunity to purchase the painting if that's what they'd like to do. And all of the profits for that will go to Wild Justice to continue our work in trying to improve this environment. And then just before we go into a serious vote of thanks, we have to thank Martin Simpson, an artist of the musical kind, and do stay on just a few more seconds because there's a second chance to hear Martin's remarkable song about the Hen Harrier. That'll be coming up soon. But more thanks are warranted, I think.
We've got lots of thanks to give out. First of all, thank you so much to everybody who contributed to this morning. Lots of amazing experts out there sharing their expertise, their knowledge and their passion for this really emotive subject, and we hope you've all been enthralled by listening to them. I also have to thank a lot of people from behind the scenes. Nancy would like me to thank her for her brilliant effort in sitting still, looking rather adorable. Sid as well, who's now gone to sleep, who wanted a cuddle.
Well, they haven't had a walk this morning.
They haven't had a walk this morning.
They're itching to stretch their legs.
Which is why they're being quite clingy at the moment. But there's lots of people behind the scenes who've worked incredibly hard to pull this together. First of all, Lucy Lapwing, Lucy Hodson, thank you very much for directing, putting this amazing show together. Honestly, without you, it really wouldn't have been what it is. And of course, we've got our own tech wizard, Fabian Harrison, who's behind the scenes, mixing all of this together, making sure that all the films come out, all those photos come out, doing a fantastic job, and also helping to organise it all as well. Got our very own Kate Crocker too, who does a fantastic job. She's currently behind the camera, so she's the one who's been swerving between the two, doing lots of different things. Again, absolutely brilliant at organising and putting all this together, but lots of other thanks as well. I'd like to thank James Stevens, Isaac Sterling, we've got Indy Green, we've got Nick Rod, Matt Edge and Harry Cartmel. Thank you very much to everyone who's put in so much time and energy and effort to bring this together. And of course, Wild Justice. I've got to thank Mark, Ruth and both of you.
Yeah, I've done a little bit, not as much as I should have done as ever. Okay, so let's just have one last little count then. Fabian, behind the scenes, what can you tell us about our e-action? Have we reached the magic figure of 1,500?
We've reached it. We've done it. 1,500 on our e-action. Thank you so much to everyone. The biggest thanks really has to go out to you, every single person who signed that and tuned in to watch this morning. You are the ones that are making that change by using your signature and your voice to make things heard and make things happen. So thank you very much. That e-action will stay up, so please do continue to share it and get it out there as much as you possibly can.
Okay, so it's time to wrap it up, and we're going to play out with some final credits, and including the fabulous music of Martin Simpson, but I went to end with just 2 words. Be nice. 3 words. Please be nice. Please be nice. Let's solve these problems together and make sure that we get a better world as a result. Thank you very much. It's the end of Hen Harrier Day 2021.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wild Justice wants uplands that work for people, the climate and for wildlife.
Ahead of this autumn's international meetings on climate and biodiversity, Wild Justice are asking UK politicians for a new commitment to the uplands of Britain.
Join us to call for uplands that work for people. Let's create a better deal for residents, workers, landowners, taxpayers and visitors. Our hills should provide benefits for all.
We need more sustainable economic activity, reduced flood risk and responsible land ownership.
Our uplands should benefit our health and well-being as beautiful places to relax and enjoy the scenery and wildlife.
Climate. Let's help the uplands reach their potential as huge natural carbon stores. They are the key to helping us tackle climate change in a sustainable way.
The return of woodlands and bogs in prime condition will help deliver that vision and bring wildlife back. Our uplands are our largest carbon bank. Let's invest in them.
Wildlife. Let's reverse decades of de-wilding and put wildlife back into the uplands.
We need to diversify landscapes, restore a mix of habitats and move away from overgrazing, burning and draining.
At the heart of this, we must see an end to the persecution of our raptors. The brutal killing of hen harriers must stop.
The killing of eagles, buzzards, peregrines, goshawks must stop.
Our uplands are not uplands without raptors thriving alongside a wealth of wildlife in a functional ecosystem.
Ask for a new future vision for our uplands, for people, for the climate, and for wildlife. You can add your name below to send a message to your political representatives that you want things to change for the better.
Bedstraw constellations shine among the blooming heather and ling, and the jade green berry bushes, oak eggers are on the wing. The stone chat and the pipits fly in spring lapwings and curlews cry, but there is something missing, there are no dancers in the sky. And the bird completes the skyline, that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? The pale ash grey sky dancer, or this selfish tyranny? At 15 I saw the falcon fly at Simmons' yacht on the River Wye. Scarce and unexpected then, rare treasure in the sky. Mid Wales 40 years ago, the red kite's beauty lit the snow. Now I might see them every day, the falcon on our city cliffs, red kite by the motorway. The bird completes the skyline, that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? The pearly ring-tailed harrier, or this shooting gallery? Now the heathland is burning above the valley towns. The greedy flames consume the peat, so when the rains come down, they pour across the moorland wreck and overwhelm the stream and beck, and overwhelm the stream and beck, and flood the towns again. Bird completes the skyline, and that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? A life-supporting landscape, or this wasteful cruelty? The bird completes the skyline, that is clear to see. An empty sky is a heartbreak, so what is it to be? The pearly ring-tailed harrier, or this shooting